2010 to 2022.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, we narrowly missed you. But
1972, those were the days, my friend.
Exactly.
we
Those
thought they'd
were
never
the
end.
days, my friend, we thought we never end.
We'd sing and dance forever and a day.
Yeah. Ever
That's a
and a
good way to
day.
start a meeting with a song, isn't it?
Yeah, who wrote that song, by the way?
Well, I don't know. It's Mary
Was a
Hopkins who sang
song
it.
from the period of the First World War, I think, was the basis of it. And
Oh, so it was
Hmm.
already an old song when Mary Hopkins handled it.
well, it was changed a lot for Mary Hopkins.
Uh-huh.
That song is not in Mary Poppins.
No, Hopkins.
Oh, Hopkins. Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
British singer from 60s.
Yeah, huh?
Rick is doing this. Rick, you don't know anything about 60s. You're too young to have known 60s, Rick.
I know a lot about the 60s.
Yeah, how?
Well, my mom was a hippie and my dad was part of the civil rights movement. So my 60s and 70s and 80s were saturated with the 60s.
Oh my goodness.
Well, 60s,
Well,
very important years for me because I came to America in 63. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah. And
well,
the year that Kennedy was assassinated, and I had no idea what was going on because I didn't speak any English and nobody explained it to me. So until years down the line, I go, oh, that's what happened in 63. Yeah.
In America, we shoot a president now and again to encourage the rest.
A delightful tradition.
Voltaire said about British admirals.
Did he? What a wisecracker. Well, welcome to everybody, including the new people who are not actually new people, but are just new to this seminar. Hi, Ken.
hi.
But welcome everyone. As usual, for those joining for the first time, this is a very weird seminar, and we're very weird people. So I hope you are too, so that you'll feel at home here. We are we're in we're in theory we're in a 5-6 year plus running arc about Kenneth Smith's philosophy, and in practice we're taking a several month long break, an interregnum in the middle, to talk about something other than the book we've been talking about. We've been talking about a book called Millennia and Microcosm, and it's a book that attempts to get us the ability. You know, the problem of the fish in the water who doesn't know what water is because it's everywhere. He's never seen anything that isn't water, so he can't discover water or think about water or understand what it does and doesn't do. Kenneth Smith's argument in this book is that moderns are in that state when it comes to understanding what does it mean to be a modern. What do we take for granted that we've never questioned? We don't know because we all take it for granted. Hi, Tiffany. We all take it for granted. So it puts us in a position where we're not able to live an examined life, right? Because there's whole bunches of things that we never even realized we took for granted. So his solution to that in Millennium Microcosm is to walk us through three different epochs of European history: the classical or ancient epoch, the medieval epoch, and then, and only then, to come back to the modern epoch. And in each of those sections, he's trying to get us to understand the main differences between how they saw the world and how we see the world. And to understand those differences not as we're better and they're worse, or they're primitive and we're advanced. These are the modern assumptions. Moderns always think that it's right in the name. We're modern, which means they're obsolete. We're up to date, which means they're backwards. We're advanced, which means they're primitive. We take these things for granted. We don't even realize we're doing it until you start to ask questions like, is it really so strange that medievals might be able to understand part of the world better than we do? To a modern, that's inconceivable. Nobody understands the world better than we do. We're scientific, we're advanced, we're modern. But Kenneth's arguing, no, that's just our conceit about ourselves. Every epoch has its corresponding worldview, and that worldview allows them to see some things better than other epochs do, but also to miss some things that other epochs wouldn't have a problem with. And that applies to moderns as much as it does to anybody else. So in this book, he's helping us to triangulate on what it means to be modern by helping us to learn to see the world through classical or ancient eyes, and then to learn to see the world through medieval eyes, comparing and contrasting them. What do they think is important? How do you decide what things mean? What is the purpose of human life? These kind of deep questions are the ones that each epoch answers differently. And then his theory is, we haven't got to this part of the book, we're in the medieval section. His theory is that once we get to the end of the book and we start talking about moderns, we'll have more tools to do that with. Because now we can start to ask questions like, what would Heraclitus of ancient Greece think about this modern question? What would Joan of Arc from the medieval era think about this particular modern problem? And to be able to answer them other than the usual modern version, which is, wow, they must think that we're like gods because we can land on the moon and fly in airplanes and they must worship us. No, no, no. I mean, they'd be impressed by those things, but they'd look at our politics and religion and other things and shake their heads and go, what is wrong with you people? And we go, what? Everybody's that way. And they'd go, we weren't that way. I know people weren't all like that. You're assuming things about human nature. We moderns are assuming things about human nature just because we've never met anybody who thinks differently. We think that's the only way you can live. That's what he's trying to fix in this book. So in the middle of the medieval discussion, we've taken a little break. And our little break is to look at a paper of his that he wrote. It's called Human Natures, Greek Philosophical Anthropology. And I'm going to call on Stephen in a second. We're looking at this paper because one of our regular attendees, Ari, who will probably join us in about a half hour or so, he asked a question. I made an offhand comment as we were talking about another topic that said, of course, Kenneth says one of the defining features of the modern epoch is that it commits genocide against one of the three basic human character types, the way that the Greeks understood it. And that's a fundamental feature of the modern epoch. And he said, whoa, 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 you can't just say that. I want to know what that means. What is that? And I thought about it and I realized we really hadn't covered that in enough detail. What is this? What are these character types? How do they relate to each other? What would it mean to commit characterological genocide? What is all that stuff about? So the topic of this little interregnum is Aristoi and modernity. David gave it that title. And we're really examining the roles of the three character types in the modern world, comparing and contrasting them, seeing what they are, how do they work, why should there be three, why couldn't there be more, why isn't there only one? We're sort of exploring this question together. And we've been at it for a few weeks, but you haven't missed a lot yet because we've only really gone through the abstract, a few prefatory caveats, and then the intro. We're just now getting into the main body. And we're going to talk about the three types. Good question, Emily. That's what we're going to talk about those together. And I'll share the paper in a moment. I'm giving a little more time for people to join so that I don't have to keep resharing, but I'll share it in a little moment. And then we're going to pick, what we're going to do today is we're going to pick one paragraph of that text, and we're really going to use that as an exercise to see how to read philosopher Kenneth Smith. He has a particular way of writing, has a particular way of using language. I see Ken smiling. Ken knows exactly what I'm talking about. You can't read Kenneth Smith the way you read the newspaper. He doesn't use words the way we do. Most philosophers don't. And so part of what we're doing is we're using this as an exercise to get better at picking apart his text and figuring out what its moving parts are. What is he trying to say? What are the insights he's trying to give us? So I'm going to stop my initial introduction there. And Stephen, if you could come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I have mentioned it before, but there's the war on the Aristos has a parallel. And that is the Western Church's war on the spirit. It just wasn't Karl Marx. What Karl Marx was saying goes back way in with the Catholic Church against the Orthodox Church, actually. The Orthodox Church continued with the old sort of Hermetic idea that man was body, soul, and spirit. But more or less, the Catholic Church expunged the spirit. You don't have an individual spirit as a man. You're simply body and soul. This led to various conflicts. The last great conflict was the Hesychast controversy. It was the way Orthodox monks in the Middle Ages felt they could meditate upon the spirit. There seemed to be something in the Catholics where they thought the spirit was something so far out that you could never touch it, whereas the Orthodox felt it was something they could come to in some way. So when we talk about the Aristos in a sense is the reflection on the spirit. If we say that the douloi is the body, the man of the body, and the what's the next one? The next one is the man of the mind. The Aristos was the man of the spirit. But the Catholic Church said there is not an individual spirit. All access to God, all the telephone exchanges go through the church. There is no individual relationship with God. I have brought it up before. I'm just noticing that, yes, there's that parallel.
Thank you, Stephen. So Emily in the chat asks, what are the three types we're looking at? So let's start there. The three character types we're talking about are drawn from classical Greek psychology, or what he calls philosophical anthropology. And we've talked about this in the seminar before, but let's see if we can do a little capsule version of it. This paper is going to go into it in more detail, but he already introduced it in the intro, so I'm going to recapitulate a little bit of the intro. Core to this, in the modern world, we say we're all created equal, and that it is held to be self-evident that we're created equal. Self-evident means there's no evidence for it. We just decided to believe it. We decided that it was true. It's evident because we want it to be true. And Jefferson writes self-evident because he's trying to avoid an argument. And the argument he's trying to avoid is, if we're all created equal, how come I can't compose music the way Mozart can? And how come Sharon is so much better at anesthesiology than Ken Huey is? All of these people have different capabilities. This isn't equal. This is different. There's diversity in human beings. In fact, if anything characterizes Homo sapiens, it is how staggeringly diverse we are. I mean, I like to use the example of the cheetah as an example of sort of how Aristotle thinks about species and defines excellence and character and culture. If you look at the character of a cheetah on the Serengeti or the Maasai plains, and then you go find a cheetah in India and investigate its behavior, they're surprisingly close. I mean, I've raised cats my whole life, and I know no two cats are identical, obviously. Even two torties like the two sisters that we're raising right now, they look the same, they grew up the same, and yet still they have completely different personalities. So on the one hand, they're all individuals. That's not in dispute. All cheetahs would all be individuals. But their culture, how they reason, what they value, the kinds of behaviors they engage in, how they get food, how they groom themselves, how they learn to sneak through the grass, all of these things, they learn to do it everywhere. And you can't say that about people. I mean, I like to then go to the Sami people of Finland and Norway and Sweden and say, people talk about the Sami as the reindeer herders. They're famous for being the people who live with the herds of reindeer and migrate with them. But what many people who've never studied the Sami don't realize is actually that's only one of the groups of the Sami. There's a whole other Sami culture, and they're the fisher people. There's people who live on the sea and they don't raise reindeer at all. They're nowhere near the reindeer. Their specialty is, the boats and the nets and the life of catching fish and drying them and preserving them through the hard times. And they're navigators. They have this whole culture, this whole value system, and all these behaviors that are completely different from the reindeer herding Sami. Even though they're both Sami, they both speak the Sami language, right? So in the modern sense, we say, well, these are the same people. They speak the same language. They're theoretically the same race, blah, 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 blah. And we'll come to Ken's question in a moment, which is right on the nose. So even people who are that close are living basically two completely different cultures. Even if we find that there's some elements of their value system that are shared, they simply have to pursue different ways of life. And that means they have to become excellent at different things. You know, the cheetah can run like the dickens. Everybody acknowledges when it comes to the land, unless you're a pronghorn antelope, you don't stand, which fortunately is on a different continent, you don't stand a chance against a cheetah. It's going to outrun you. It's fast. That's its excellence. And that excellence, this is Aristotle's point, is both a value for the cheetah. It wants the little cubs watch the adult race like the dickens. And what they feel is not, well, that's weird, or that's not interesting. What they feel is, I want to do that. I need to be that. They feel this longing to emulate. The value is coded right into their genetics of their character. And it causes their behavior, whatever their differences in personality, it causes their behavior to converge on practicing this thing that when they become excellent enough at it, they can live the way of life of a cheetah, which they could never do if they could only run as fast as a wolf or a lion. You with me so far? There's a relationship, Aristotle says, between character and culture. The values that you have, the things that you yearn for, that you want to do, that you want to behave like, are in a healthy species are lined up with your culture, your way of life. What part of the natural world feeds you, cleans you, houses you, makes it possible for you to live. And your character has to be such that you want to do those things. You care about those things. You notice those things. You're discriminating about those things. And this is how a cheetah is, whether it's in India or whether it's in Africa. But it's not the way the Sami are, even when they're just a few miles apart, some on the coast and others inland. And the diversity across the whole planet is vastly greater than that. We basically, if you think of an animal species not in terms of its biology, but in terms of its culture, something we never talk about in modern science, that animals could be defined as species according to their culture. What is cheetah culture? And how is that different from jaguar culture or leopard culture or lion culture? They're very different cultures. They live differently. Then the thing that strikes you about Homo sapiens is that we're the only animal that is not instinctively genetically programmed to grow up to have a single culture. All the others grow up to live a kind of life. But something happened in the course of our evolution that's related to why we have intelligence and why we have adaptability and why we learn ravenously as infants and young children. Something happened to us in our evolution to turn us into the kind of animal that doesn't produce one culture, but produces lots and lots and lots and lots of cultures. Each of us goes through a process of acculturation in which we, out of the many things a Homo sapiens could become, we become a specific animal. The fisherman, the reindeer herder, the accountant, whatever it is, the cartoonist, right? We become something specific out of the generic possibilities that we're born into. So the Greeks looked at this and they said, we can see this happening all around us. The Greeks understood that what we think of as the Greeks was something that they invented in the 800s BC. I was just reading an interesting article about this. In the 800s BC, before the 800s BC, like in the time of Homer, the Odyssey, the film is out there. In the time of Homer, the Greeks didn't have a word for the Greeks. They didn't think of themselves as the Greeks. They were a bunch of separate tribes. And they're like, oh, there's those guys over there. They didn't think there's an us and it encompasses all these tribes. And the way that they lived, the way that they fought, the way that their competition this is something Nietzsche writes about in his essay, Homer's Contest. He says, the way that the Achaeans, the Mycenaeans, the way that they thought about themselves and their world led them not only to be militarily aggressive against Troy and other powers, they were militarily aggressive against each other. And they tore their civilization to pieces. And depending on if you buy the Bronze Age collapse theory, they may have then become bandits and traveled all over the Mediterranean, trashing civilizations, sacking cities, and leading to what's called the Bronze Age collapse, which was a dark age. It was a long dark age before the classical Greek era. Whether or not that's true, that's what the classical Greeks, their descendants, thought was true. The classical Greeks, around the time of 800, 776, when the Olympic Games were founded, they basically looked at themselves, they looked at their heroic ancestors in their world, and they said, dear God, what have we done? The bravest of us, the smartest of us, Odysseus, the cleverest, the wisest, somehow all their virtues took the form of vices and destroyed everything that they held dear. And now we are illiterate and we have a high infant mortality. We barely know 30 miles away what the next village might be. We're scrabbling out an existence in the dirt when our ancestors had all these capabilities. And they made a decision, according to Nietzsche in Homer's Contest. And the decision was, we need to change our culture into one in which we don't just fight each other all the time, in which we transform our conflict into a contest or a competition. And they inaugurated the Olympic Games. They inaugurated the Nemean Games, the Isthmian Games, and so on. They decided to unite their various deities into a shared pantheon, the 12 Olympian gods. They said, you can have a huge diversity of beliefs, but we at least have to have something in common. And they said, and we need to acknowledge that we are one people, no matter how many tribes we are. So the point is, the Greeks were in a good position to understand that there is an enormous diversity, even among people who share, a common ancestry, the way the Greeks do. And they saw that diversity as important, as crucial, as defining of Homo sapiens. This is exactly the opposite of how we see things. We think everybody's the same. We're all just one Homo sapiens. We're all the same. We're all equal. And the thing that's weird about that kind of politics is it starts by denying the obvious truth, right? I bet everybody on this call has different skills, has a different way of life, has a different way of seeing the world in a way that's vastly more different than two cheetahs are from each other, no matter where you find them. That diversity is central, and the Greeks basically developed a whole system of psychology that starts with the proposition that we're not equal. We're not supposed to be equal. We evolved to be different from each other. It's good that we're different from each other, and that governments and cultures need to be constructed in such a way that that diversity is harnessed for the good of everybody. We'll come back to this in a moment. But Michelle Ma, you have your hand up. Come on, bring yourself off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Um, I think you kind of sound like a modern day Socrates anthropologist historian kind of guy. I think you got to give Socrates a run for his money in that primitive, we call it primitive age. I think the other thing that's interesting is what's lost in our idea of history? What's lost in our idea of freedom? Some people now, I've heard people say things like people in Middle Ages worked way less than we do. So, and their work was fairly repetitive, easy to learn, and it was also communal. Like if you see the painting, I believe it's called the Gleamers, which is about the agricultural work. These women and men are all working together, so they can crack jokes, so they have a freedom to tell stories, so they can talk about how much it sucks, but it's not like they're in chains and bonded together. I mean, we in our modern society, we can't really understand it without understanding bureaucracy. I suggest reading Max Weber to start, but bureaucracy has left us with no place to go, because even in feudalism, if you had, say, you really needed medicine, you could go to the Orthodox priest, you could go to the Catholic priest, and they would likely give you enough money for your child's medicine. Now, these days there's no one to go to. We have a large systemic error. I mean, there's absolutely no one to go to, and some people accrue debt, and then they find out they have so much medical debt they're completely bankrupt and must sell everything and are homeless now. So it's like everything is tracked and yet nothing is really given. So it's incredibly hard for a lot of people to survive even on a day-to-day basis where they're working a job that may have in the past employed 3 people. So they're doing the work of 3 people, and AI is just something they shove at people to say, well, you have AI, so you should be 99% more productive. And they have these outrageous comments on how people should be productive while only certain people are being targeted. I mean, this is not some kind of equality case. We are not living in equality. They may hire an immigrant and say, well, the immigrant needs to learn because, they love America and they came to the country and we're trying to, help the immigrants. So, like, at any given time, a person who's lived in America for 100 years with a family is going to be prejudiced against by an immigrant because the immigrants, they have a lot of vote. They have the Democrats actually support the immigrants. And I'm not like a big Trump fan, but he does have some points here to make. And that is one that people who have um, things that supposedly spell privilege, whether it be skin color, education, or whatnot, have a much tougher time in the job market. I mean, like, for example, I thought I would be much better off going to MIT for the Master of Finance program than Johns Hopkins. But then I check and see that Johns Hopkins is um, income for graduates is almost twice as high as MIT. So everyone thinks that they need numbers, they need hardness, and suddenly, because this person communicates better, they get the job. Not because they know scholastic theory and black trolls and all that.
Thank you, Michelle. The point you're making echoes a point that Hannah Arendt makes in The Origins of Totalitarianism, which is a book that I'm studying reasonably closely these days. She talks about the origins of the nation state, and we just assume the nation state is the normal default way that people would organize, and that it's defined however we feel like it's defined. And whatever we were taught in elementary school, we assume that's right. But she says if you actually look at the history, the nation state is a very weird construct. And fundamental to the concept of the nation state is that every natio is related to natal, like natality, like birth. Every group of people who share common birth, a common ancestry, i.e., a race, would make a state that is the state for that race. And she says this is a terrible thing, but nobody talks about it. Says Germany was created to be the state for the Germans. Italy was created to be the state for the Italians. England was created to be the state for the English. And this is bad for a number of reasons. But among those reasons is, what if you're a people without a state? Like she's writing about the Holocaust. She says, like the Jews are a people without a state. So what are they supposed to do? She's writing in 1953 or so. She's talking about this problem. And she's saying, well, what happens is all these nation states are handing out rights to the people who are defined as being the same. We're all Germans, so we all get rights, and the German state gives the Germans the rights. And it doesn't require any leap of thought for some disaffected German to go, well, if this state exists for the Germans, what the fuck are all these other people doing here? Right? I mean, what Hitler came up with this is Hannah Arendt's point. He may have been a terrible guy who did terrible things, but the preconditions for that kind of thinking were baked right into the modern order with this idea that each state is for one group of people who are the same kind of people. And because they're the same, we will give them rights. But if they're different, they have to leave. They have to go away because this isn't their state. And if they don't have a state anywhere on earth, then I guess they should just disappear. And thus the final solution. She says the entire logic of the Holocaust flows directly from the logic of the modern nation state. And, this is why horrific acts of anti-Semitism were not limited to Germany, but included almost all of the countries in Europe did terrible, terrible things. In Eichmann in Jerusalem, she talks about how after the Holocaust, people who were freed from the death camps who survived would sometimes on foot trudge the long distances home to their home countries, to their home villages, and then they get there and be murdered by their neighbors because their neighbors were just as anti-Semitic as Hitler. They're like, yeah, there's a button for raising your hand. I see the question in there. There should be a button down at the bottom, and I don't have it because I'm the moderator. But I think it's under the react button that you can find the thing to raise your hand. And anytime people raise their hands, we form a queue and we'll call on people as soon as we get to a thing. But Philip, if you'd like, I'll just assume you have your hand up for now, and that you can slide in after Michelle. So the point is this idea that political equality leads to treating each other well. That if I just declare that we're all the same, that we're all equal, then that means we'll treat each other the same. Arendt actually makes the point that by declaring that only equals deserve to have the rights of the state, these nation states actually used equality as the basis for doing terrible, terrible things. And if we had had a system of human rights that said we don't have to be the same in order to deserve rights, It's okay for us to be different from each other, and we still deserve rights. That the rights don't come from pretending to be equal. The rights come from our shared humanity, which we have regardless of whether we're the same. Then the entire framework of the terrible things that happened under Stalin and under Hitler and so on, that framework wouldn't have existed. It's not that they couldn't have done it, but their whole line of argument that justified what they did would have been missing, would have been absent. So we're used to thinking that equality leads to goodness in politics, but that's because we don't carefully analyze the way that insisting that people must be equal led to catastrophe in the middle of the 20th century. Michelle, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I've worked on this through a Mellon Mays project fellowship when I was at the U of Chicago, and I spent a whole summer studying the Holocaust, writing a paper about it. Um, the one thing that people have wrong with the Holocaust is that it mostly targeted Jews. I mean, a lot of Slavic people were interned in these camps, and there's almost nothing about what happened to them. In fact, when they found the people in the camps, most of the people left in the prison uniforms were Slavic. So, I mean, Hitler's plan was to essentially conquer all of the Slavic lands, force them into domination via slavery, like much worse than serfdom, because it was ultimately bent on annihilation. And that's the kind of Armageddon that people forget. They remember the Jews, they don't remember the Slavs. In fact, there were most likely many more Slavs killed than Jews, and yet this is conveniently hidden in the end of history. It was like Hitler wanted everything wrong to go wrong with Russia, and this is one reason Stalin came into power. I mean, if they had a weaker, if they had a weaker leader, they could have all been conquered and turned into dust and ashes by the German Jews. I will say German Jews because so much of Germany had assimilated into Judaism. It was probably the most Jewish country on earth. It was almost more Jewish than Israel at that certain crucible point. It wasn't like German Jews because like essentially once they take away the German Jew, Germany itself has vastly changed. I mean, think of the people in Germany who produced the most: Wittgenstein, Trakl. I mean, in Austria they had all these great Thomas Mann. I mean, all these great writers were German Jews, and without that collaboration, I mean, we don't even have that many German people left in Germany. They may look German, but they don't know anything about Goethe. They're really clueless about their culture. It's like with the supposed vanishing, supposed propaganda that we're killing all the Jews. I mean, essentially, they killed Germany as well. So there's that master slave dialectic where a lot of people think we actually killed that many Jews. But if I got this book called Pogrom, and it shows that when they tried to attack the Jews, in many instances, I mean, this has been happening since medieval ages, Middle Ages, they would oftentimes attack the Jews, and the locals would all bring their what they can to kill as many Jews as possible. In a village of 400 to 800 Jews, usually only 2 to 12 people were killed. So these Jews were actually manifesting violent defense of their own kind. It wasn't some kind of supplication or some kind of universal sterility that is oftentimes presumed.
The point I really want to take away from what you said is it is little appreciated for various reasons today that the Holocaust was directed against everybody that the Nazis thought wasn't German and German enough, not pure enough, not equal. So you're right. They went after the Slavs. They went after black people. They actually went after union organizers and socialists and anybody they thought was, not the same. They went after the mentally ill first. The original extermination camps went after mentally ill people and disabled people, gays, lesbians. They were allergic to anything that wasn't equal. Equality was the banner of the basically it was the core value of the Nazi movement. We had the only people who are equal should be in Germany. And by equal, we mean German in the way that we define it. There's an interesting point in the third section of The Origins of Totalitarianism that Hannah Arendt makes. She says there's a stage late in the war where when trying to decide who to promote, Hitler and his lieutenants stopped looking at people's resumes. I don't care what you've done. They'd look at the photos. Do you look Aryan? And if you looked Aryan, they would assume that therefore you had all the right Aryan virtues. And therefore you must have had a great career, or if not, somebody was holding you back. And if we promote you now, you'll be amazing. And so they're literally assigning people to be lieutenants and colonels who don't have any performance behind them, but they look the right way. They have that equal look. And that's what they were promoting. So again, this is the point of all this. We could talk forever about the Holocaust, but the point of this is to explore the idea that, you know, the notion that equality leads to political goodness is problematic in all kinds of ways. And the Greeks tried to build their political system based on the proposition that there's an enormous diversity of human beings, and that cultures and economies and governments are going to have to deal justly with those differences. And so the reason that we're exploring these three character types is because they put a lot of time and effort into trying to figure out what are the basic character types in Homo sapiens. Why do they manifest the way that they do? What do these different character types want? And how can you build a society in which these people basically get what they want more often than not? They said it would be wrong to impose a single way of life on people who are so diverse. You have to somehow come up with a culture that cannot, to use Stephen's terminology, that has enough centripetal force to pull together, but also allows for the diversity that actually exists in Homo sapiens. There's a one of the core ideas they had was this idea of arete, which I'll pop there in the chat. Arete, which is a kind of excellence or skill. And we translate it as virtue, but we're sort of missing the point when we do that. The point of arete is that the cheetah's arete is its speed, right? And so the arete has survival value, and it goes directly to a way of life that's made possible by that arete. And Aristotle says the thing about Homo sapiens is different people have different arete. And each arete that somebody has, it might seem irrelevant today. Okay, so you've got a Mozart and he has an amazing gift with music. And you think, well, but we're fighting a war against Persia. What good is that? I don't know. You know, maybe we should stamp it out and make that guy learn to be a soldier. That would be sort of the modern approach. Everybody gets the same education and behaves the same way. But the Greeks said, life is unpredictable. We don't know what kind of calamities and catastrophes our civilization is going to face. So if we want to be able to deal with the uncertainties of the future, what it means is that we need a culture in which all these different arete can flourish to their fullest. So that if the crisis we face tomorrow is some weird thing we didn't expect, there's a good chance that somewhere among the Greeks is some weirdo that we allowed him to, we allowed him to flourish in that area that we thought wasn't important, and now there he is, and his time has come, and he stands up and he saves us, and our civilization gets to continue because that weird guy with his weird skill, made it possible for us to survive. The Greeks thought that was pretty central to their concept of how a civilization has to prepare for the future. You need a rich garden of unpredictable range of skills and excellences, and that's the opposite of the modern everybody has to get the 3 R's and only the 3 R's, and we must test everybody to see that they all came out as clones and they can be mutually interchangeable units of production. Philip, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. I see Angelina, you're next in the line after Philip.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Okay, so I have a shallow question and hopefully a deeper question. My shallow question is, I'm really trying to figure out what that image is from the meetup page. It's a graphic. It looks like it's from a graphic novel. It's got a guy looking at a bunch of signs where there's a fork in the road. Rick, you suggested it might be from an AI generated image, but I'm hoping it's from a graphic novel so I could read the graphic novel. Anyway, that's my shallow question, and I'll get on to my deeper question, which is throughout, let's say, counter-enlightenment thinkers, there's been a strong tendency to make what I would consider a really obvious mistake. And some very, very smart people have made this mistake, which makes me think there must be some kind of willful ignorance going on. They must have to work really hard to dumb themselves down in order to make this mistake. And it's the mistake that if you have a basic attitude that people in your culture are equal, that somehow this will make them the same. And this seems manifestly false, right? Like one person could be excellent at learning languages, another person excellent at learning mathematics. That you could have a society that had a basic willingness to see what was good in everybody. You could, if you wanted, link that with an idea of equality. Okay, we're all equal. And I get it that that's a bit of a stipulation. That's a bit of a starting assumption. But you could easily have this and say, well, let's look at what the arete is in each person. Have a basic attitude of looking for equality, and yet in no way end up with people all being equal. But it's been a feature of counter-Enlightenment thinkers. I would include Nietzsche. Now, love him or hate him, you can't deny he's a really smart guy. And he's making this mistake, right? That if you don't have a sharp distinction between the masters and the slaves, that you're going to have everybody being the same. So somehow the equal turns out to be the same, which just seems like a big, big error. I haven't read Kenneth Smith. I'm kind of new to the meetup. And I'm just wondering where all of this would fit in with the Kenneth Smith works that you tend to study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Let's tackle those one at a time. David, can you come off mute and tell us about the origins of that image that you used for today's meetup?
It's AI.
Yeah. So not a graphic novel, Philip. It's AI.
Okay. Disappointing, but at least I know the truth. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, as far as the second, the issue isn't about, to say that equality will force people to be the same. There may be people who made that argument, but that's certainly not Kenneth's argument. It's not the Greek argument here. Their argument is that if people are different from each other, but you try to force them to be the same, that's how you get catastrophe. That's how you get a Holocaust, for example. And you see some of this in Kafka's writing. Kenneth Smith loves Kafka. Hannah Arendt loves Kafka. I discovered, by the way, last month, Hannah Arendt was the one who popularized the English translations of Kafka. She was the big champion who brought Kafka to the United States and England. I didn't know that before. She grew up with his stuff, thought it was amazing, and said, "How come none of these English-speaking people seem to have heard of him?" So she brought him over. Anyway, Kenneth loves Kafka's work, and Kafka is often portraying the mismatch between a human being and the system that purports to be for them, right? So like the systems of government, the systems of laws, the systems of the economy, systems of justice. Do they actually match the real human being so that we can live a rich life, a healthy life, and be a person? And Kafka is constantly describing scenarios in which the system is so abstract and artificial. It's based on human beings as they might exist in the land of theory, but not as they exist in reality. And then the consequence is that people can't get their basic needs met because the system is inhumane. And this is the concern, at least that Kenneth Smith has. It's also a concern that Aristotle has, that he writes about, although we often miss it in his writing. I've just been going through some of it as I've been reading Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. And there's a number of quotes from Aristotle where he makes clear his concern about whether or not the political economy is a healthy, good match for the actual diversity of human beings as they exist. We'll talk about the implications of some of that this week and next week. But as far as any chance that we will accidentally make everybody into clones of one another, I think the 20th century basically disproved that. When I was a kid, I grew up with the notion, and you've probably all heard this phrase, that human beings are born as a tabula rasa, the tabula rasa theory, and that's the blank slate. The idea is that human beings are 100% programmable. And so they're born capable of being anything. And then with the right education and the right system of carrots and sticks, you can make them into what you want them to be. Maybe the blank there, it's Steven Pinker book by the blank slate, talking about that very thing. So the issue is, we tried that experiment. We tried to compel everybody to be equal, whether they were or not. And it was a catastrophe. We ran into all kinds of problems. And among the problems we ran into is, and this is something Kenneth talks about, is 3 children. He and Angela, they raised their kids. They're both of them are strong-willed people. They had clear ideas about how to raise their kids, to try to be, to try to help them to grow up to be good people. And what they thought that meant But it didn't take long for them to discover that each of the three kids was completely different from birth. They had different things they cared about, different things they wanted. They had different, one of them would be cooler and more analytical. One of them would be more passionate and emotional. They weren't clones of each other. Even the children of the same parents. And that really acted as an eye opener to him to understand that there's a certain amount of who we are that comes from our cultural experiences growing up, but there's a certain amount of who we are that we're just born that way. And these things interact in a complicated tug of war kind of way to make each person who they are. And the question is, can a civilization rise to the challenge of governing a species that has that kind of diversity in it? Or is it going to pretend that we're all the same? Like the mutually assured destruction theory, the theory that was popularized by the mathematician whose the film A Beautiful Mind was about. And he came up with the idea that everybody is selfish and greedy and just wants to take everything they want, and then tried to design a strategy for international nuclear relations that would work with that kind of human being. Well, hello, only some people are that way. We call them sociopaths. The rest of us, there's a diversity of emotional lives and intellectual lives and value systems. And the mad theory doesn't apply so well to the actual human beings that exist in the real world. Thank goodness. But this kind of mismatch of theory and policy and law and system to the actual organic animal of the Homo sapiens before you, this is a problem, especially if the system demands that it not have to change, but that the person change to conform to the system. And frequently we can't. We're just not made that way. And then what? Well, welcome to the modern world, says Kenneth Smith, the era in which we believe we worship systems and we don't want to acknowledge the actual people in front of us. Angelina, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Am I unmuted now? Yes, hello. Yes, I just wanted to thank Michelle for her point, because certainly, and it's not just with the Slavs, but even with the Roma people, they have a different word for the Holocaust, paramos, I think, which means a devouring. And as Michelle pointed out, we don't really know, the numbers are all contested, right? But certainly the Slavic people and the Roma people and the disabled and etc. By the way, just a footnote that I lived near the first facility that the Nazis created in Perna, which is oddly enough called Sonnenstein, which was the first kind of killing facility, and it was originally for autistic and mentally disabled people before they created Dachau. Anyway, so I lived not far from there. It brings up the notion of Aristoi, actually, because in terms of the hierarchy of victimhood, the Slavs and the Roma have never, or anybody else, have ever been compensated, unlike one particular group. So this particular group is actually, I don't really like talking about the Holocaust, but certainly there is a kind of Aristoi to victimhood here. Because other groups were not at all compensated and don't have a lobby for them to ever be compensated. So maybe that Greek idea of the Aristoi kind of works here, actually. And thanks to Michelle again for making that point.
Thank you, Angelina. Yeah, this is one of the places in the modern world we treat the term aristocracy, and by extension Aristoi, as being some small group of people who want to be in charge of everybody else. But Aristotle's very clear that is not the definition of aristocracy or Aristoi. He says that's the definition of oligarchy. An oligarchy is a small group of people who want to be in charge, but shouldn't be, because they're not fit to govern. It's just some random assembly of yahoos who want to stuff things in their pockets or, lord it over other people. He says those aren't Aristoi. They're wannabe Aristoi. They're pretend Aristoi. Just like if someone feeds you, a tea with cyanide in it, it's a pretend tea. That's not a real tea. Real tea won't kill you. It might give you a small buzz and make you feel more alert, but it is not going to kill you dead. Aristotle is all about what is the key essential distinction that makes something what it is and not something else. And so this is going to take us right to the heart of the question of these three character types, including the Aristoi. What defines the Aristoi is not that they are in charge, Any idiot oligarch can be in charge. What defines the Aristoi is, well, we'll talk about that today. We'll get into that. So, kind of you're describing, an inequity coming out of the Holocaust for sure. Yeah. And the fact that when we talk about the Holocaust, we don't talk about the sum total of all the people who suffered, the Roma, the Sinti, and the others. Part of what that does is it creates in our minds a distorted picture of what happened. So we might think it was exclusively hatred and aggression towards one particular people. And by doing that, it makes us think, okay, well, if we can get rid of anti-Semitism, then Holocaust can't happen, right? Because that's what that model suggests. But if instead the truth about the Holocaust is that it was inflicted on many kinds of people, anybody who wasn't perceived as German enough, then that takes us back to Hannah Arendt's point about the dangers of the way that we've defined the modern nation state. Should human rights flow from a state that exists for everybody who is of the same race, and what are the dangers of doing that, and can we come up with a more viable, equitable model for international human rights that doesn't depend on that? People have been struggling with that problem ever since Hannah Arendt wrote her analysis in The Origins of Totalitarianism. And as a student of the international human rights framework, I can see that they've been working hard on this particular problem. But in our popular consciousness, we still talk about the Holocaust in ways that confuse us and set us up to be potentially the people to commit the next Holocaust, because we still don't understand why the first one happened. You could turn around one day and find that we've set up concentration camps all over the United States and that we stick immigrants in them. I mean, who knows? If you don't understand why things happen, you can cause them to happen again. And that's part of Arendt's point. Anyway, thank you for bringing that up, Angelina. It's so important. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, just for the record, although my memories are hazy, because I last looked at The Origins of Totalitarianism in the late 80s or early 90s, she has nice things to say about the U.S. also. She does, I think, admire the way the U.S. Constitution breaks the blood and soil model. You do not become an American by being born to Americans, or being, and this is probably more contentious, being indigenous to our soil in some way. This is not a country for the Germans. It's almost, maybe Stephen will want to talk. Oh, he's coming up soon here. He'll want to talk about ideology. It's a country for people that can read and understand our Constitution and say, this is the way I would like to be governed. And she does feel, I think, that you have to make that commitment, because it is a commitment to a set of ideas about how governance should proceed that determines that, rather than who your parents were or where you were born or something like that. The other, for Michelle, Tim Snyder's recent book, Bloodlands, not that recent, but for me it's recent because it's not from the 1960s, gives a lot of justice to what happened in the area between Nazi Germany and Soviet, and a Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. I won't say Russia, it wasn't necessarily Russian, but yes, it was to be cleansed. And the winner was going to be free to resettle it, either with it becoming newly Russian or newly German. So, but if you look at I'll agree, if you look at the classic histories of the Second World War, since the British didn't fight there on the Eastern Front, and Americans didn't fight there, our historians didn't have much to say about what happened there. And it was only with the fall of the Soviet Union, the German records of largely of what happened were captured by the Russians. So it wasn't until the 90s with the dissolution of the Soviet Union that the documentation became really available to historians about what happened in that area. And two, about maybe and a third, maybe about Aristoi. You know, it's not clear to me that if we had more Aristoi, we'd be better governed, because Aristoi don't need government very much. Their primary quality, I think, is self-governance, but not necessarily that they ought to govern others. You know, we have from Plato the parable of the cave. How do you get the guy that knows how to govern to come back down and rule people justly? He's ruling himself just fine. Why doesn't he just walk off? I think there's a uh-oh. Steve doesn't like Snyder. Stephen doesn't like Snyder. I don't know what he said, why that is. But, you know, Aristoi, if you had a lot of Aristoi in a society, you might have an anarchy, because they'd say, don't need it. Don't need government. We're all self-ruling. We'll just live by ourselves. Kind of want, and the other, just so people are clear, I think Kenneth is very serious when he said this is a characterology. We're studying personality types, not social classes. This is not a sociology paper that says these, yes, we're trying to identify major groups of personality types within the humanity. And these are three that are very interesting because of the roles that these types have played in Western civilization. But there could be other types. I don't know. And Kenneth, I don't know. Does he study every type of human being that ever existed for the entire history? I don't think he did. You know, and he's I think he's saying it's a characterology. I think he's dead serious. He's not talking sociology. He's not saying, he's saying it's very important. He says Aristoi could rule, could be very good at it. He doesn't say they maybe ought to fight for it or should do it or society should make them do it, which might be the thing. I don't know. You know, we've talked a lot earlier about how, you know, as you point out in Aristotle, the Greeks had people they called Aristoi and ruled as an aristocracy. But we've already seen that there was a lot of hand waving that went along with saying that. It wasn't exactly true then that these people ruled by their superior personal virtue as opposed to their maybe superior martial virtue. I don't know. Well, enough.
Thank you, Donald. We'll get into the Douloi, Banausoi, and Aristoi, the three types, in a little bit after we get through the initial rush of questions and comments. Hey, Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yes. The genocide of the Aristoi. I'm probably just going to emphasize again. Something I tend to pick up in history, and it's a little bit beyond me, but the Western Church decided men and women have an animal soul, if you like, and an intellectual soul. Now, if you look at modern rationalism treats the rational mind as the absolute highest faculty a man can have. That's it. That's the God. rational thought. And how will we solve all the world's problems? We'll invent rationalist mumbo jumbo. We'll all repeat the rationalist mantras. We'll create the UN, which is just one long line of rationalist mantras. These are the magic formulas. And there is nothing beyond that. Marxism treats, the rational mind as the magic formula. The universities, they see the Juloy out there on the streets, those strange men who dance and follow football, yes. But we in the universities, we're the rational ones. We represent man's highest faculty. This is the modern culture. Now, look, I don't fully understand it, but there was this controversy in the Middle Ages that there was a greater faculty than the rational mind, which they defined as a spiritual soul. The Western Church wasn't too happy with it. The Eastern Church continued with a belief in the individual spirit, that somehow every individual man can somehow, through his own soul, meet God. The Western Church decided, sorry, dudes, you have a soul which appreciates the earthly, the passions, the animal qualities, and you have a rational mind soul. They included women as well, so apparently the church decided women had souls as well, which I'm not too sure is a good idea, but anyway. They're saying that you get this in all this ancient Hermetic stuff, that there's a belief that there's something beyond the rational mind. But it's been exterminated in modern thought. And every great move, like, the revolution, is the extermination of the spirit. I don't fully understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll expand on some of your comments after Michelle's feedback. We'll use what you said as the launch point to get into the 3 character types and how they work. So I'm sticking a pin in it, but I'm not going to forget. I'll come back to it. Michelle, tell us what's on your mind.
Just a few points. One, Hermann Hesse said in one of his books, if they find a German boy, just one German boy, somehow with his recollection genius, he can recreate all of German civilization. So this is about the importance of one versus about a lot. And you can find 100,000 Germans in Germany today, and they're not able to recollect anything about, say, Goethe, or do anything for the culture of Germany. The culture of Germany has turned dark, narcissistic, and Nazistic in the worst sense. I don't think they understand what Nazism is. I don't think anyone truly understands what Nazism is. What I do know is that in their superior attitude, they bring their own downfall. I mean, Germany, before they said, oh, get rid of all the Jews, was quite a thriving country. Apart from World War One, which they could have won, actually. It was more like, it was they were set up. Yeah, I mean, I can understand their anger. But during the Weimar period, I mean, yes. I mean, all we talk about is inflation. What we don't talk about is how much art and culture happened during that time. Like, the writer of the book Cabaret was Christopher Isherwood, Berlin Stories. All these talented people were rushing into Germany, and they could have eventually built a democratic socialist country and avoid the war completely, and still probably offer more bang for the buck in terms of tourism than Thailand does. That's for sure. So I mean, essentially, like, Germany had reorganized itself, and they had certainly a lot of things going for them in terms of not only a tourist industry, but an industry that could take the talents of the global community and meld into one big country. The Weimar period was like, it's this book by Peter Gay called, it was the Outsiders Insiders. So people who felt like outsiders and other cliques and clans, they could feel like they belonged in Weimar Germany. It was a certain spirit of that time which was not everlasting, and Peter Gay is too boring to write about it profoundly. But certainly a topic worth looking at for any grad students or professors. What exactly happened during Weimar Germany? I mean, there are some quotes like the German daughters were prostituting and the German professors were begging on the streets. So, you have a certain reconciliation there. You have the belief, the supposed belief that the Germans had carried on for so long, that the women were nothing more than plants, according to Hegel. And then, when it finally came down, you think who made more begging, who made more prostituting, and so there's a certain emancipation of the female soul during that time. I don't know what the German word for female soul is, but there's sort of emancipation of German soul, and a lot of women were allowed to breathe free from these corseted, firm ground lines that the father makes, the father, and there was a certain rebellion. It was like one of the most poetic rebellions of the earth, and they completely crushed it with a back to the father. I mean, Hitler was seen as some kind of powerful man, father figure, Führerhead, fatherhead. So like he was seen as this kind of man who would bring order and practice back in Germany, because they were scared that people who had been tossed aside as like poor Jews or gypsies or German women were all going to effectively find a voice.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm going to take us to the paper and to the three character types to introduce for the folks that haven't been here before. You'll see it as a PDF, 1997 Human Nature's Greek Philosophical Anthropology, 2026 ot5 ot4 toad.pdf. That's there in the chat. If you back up and find it, you can download your copy of it. It will appear eventually in a book that we're preparing of Kenneth Smith's essays called Old World Principles. And we may or may not also include it in Millennia and Microcosm when we bring that into print. But in it, he talks about what is this Greek philosophical anthropology? What did the Greeks think the three main character types of Homo sapiens were? And this builds off the work of Hannah Arendt in her book, The Human Condition. Many people, I'd say many more people have read Eichmann and Jerusalem than have read The Human Condition. Which is unfortunate because it's a hell of a book. I'm gonna actually put a link to it here. Well, I'm gonna put a link to the Wikipedia article, The Human Condition. If you Google Hannah Arendt, The Human Condition, and Internet Archive, you'll find free downloadable copies of The Human Condition from the Internet Archive. It's readily available, and in it she talks about what she's doing in this book. This book is a follow-up to The Origins of Totalitarianism, which is something that a lot of readers don't make the connection. Origins of Totalitarianism, everyone knows we're talking about the Holocaust and we're talking about Stalinism, and she's exploring how did these things happen, why did they happen, what were the preconditions that allowed them to happen, and what are the things about them that we misunderstand, and by misunderstanding we set ourselves up to accidentally do it again. But when she finished the book, she had a concern that she had put more focus on the preconditions for Nazism than she had in the preconditions for Stalinism. In the United States, we just assume that Stalin is a natural successor to Lenin. But as she argues in section 3 of The Origins of Totalitarianism, they were almost opposites. The things that Lenin was trying to do, Stalin undid almost all of them when he got in power. And many of the things that Lenin was trying to do would have done decentralization and empowered a lot of regional workers groups. And Stalin re-centralized and took all that power back. And in fact, he went through and purged a whole bunch of the people that Lenin had promoted. He broke up the 5-year plan. He replaced the constitution. He basically disassembled everything Lenin did. And so she felt like when she finished the book, she had left this enormous problem. And the problem was, okay, we see where Hitler came from and we see what he drew on in German and general European culture in order to create the Nazi movement. But that she felt she had not illustrated where the hell Stalin came from. It's not enough to say, well, he came from the party, because yeah, but he disassembled the party. I mean, he tore to pieces the whole thing. So he did not, in his heart of hearts, feel like he was continuing what Lenin did. He was trying to do something else. What is that something else? Where did it come from? Where did he get his ideas? Where did he get his motivation? So she spent really the rest of her life, in addition to doing other things, she off and on was doing a deep dive into the origins of Stalinism, and that included a critique of Marxism, which is quite an interesting critique. And in the course of that, she reached a conclusion, an initial conclusion that's not very well known, and that she talks about a bit in her book Between Past and Future, where she says, what many people don't understand about Marx is that most of the features of Marx that people think are the most extreme and revolutionary are not. Most of the things they think are extreme and revolutionary are the same assumptions that all the rest of Western political culture makes. He just says them out loud. There's a lot of basic assumptions behind de Tocqueville and behind, you know, Jefferson and Madison, and that are baked into, if you read Hobbes, if you read Hume, if you read, you know, all these, John Stuart Mill, you read all these political thinkers, what we think of as the mainstream Western political thinkers, and you say, what is the basis for their ideas about government? You find that frequently Marx agrees with them 100% on those things. We think he doesn't, because that's how we teach Marx as this weird aberration, in the same way that we teach Hitler as this weird aberration. And part of what she did in The Origins of Totalitarianism is demystify that and demonstrate that actually Hitler's basing his horrible things on the nation state itself and how we've conceived it. Well, she does the same thing with the parts of Marx that Stalin drew on in his reign of terror. She explores that stuff in Marx and shows that those were not the parts that were unique to Marx. There were things that were unique to Marx, but it's not the stuff Stalin drew on. Like Hitler, Stalin was essentially taking seriously some of the basic premises of the modern Western political economy that the rest of us don't want to talk about, but it's baked right in there. There's these horrible assumptions that we don't want to question. So realizing that, she realized the only way to explain where Stalinism came from was to first write this book, The Human Condition, which is not trying to answer that question directly. The Human Condition is trying to say, we need to agree on some basic terms about what is politics, what is an economy, what is a society, what are the different realms of our life together, and how have people imagined that they work? What's a common terminology we can use? And only after we establish that stuff are we then going to be able to say, okay, fine. Now, how does John Stuart Mill plug into that? How does Marx plug into that? How does Stalin plug into that? But as long as we are confused about our terms, there's no point in talking. It's just gibberish. It's like in modern political discourse, where we say authoritarianism equals tyranny, equals fascism, equals extremism. They're all the same thing. It's like we're reducing all these different things to being the devil. They're all the bad guy. They're all the same. All you do is punch it in the face and everything will be fine. And she says that is not a sophisticated level analysis that's going to allow us to seriously stop the next totalitarian movement. If we want to stop it, we have to be able to distinguish a totalitarian movement from a fascist movement, from a tyranny, from an authoritarian government. I mean, these things are all different. So she's trying to establish this common basis in the human condition. And as part of that, and this is the critical point, she talks about the Greco-Roman concept of the three spheres of the economy, three different realms of the economy that behave differently, and in which the idea of what is authority and how do you make decisions is completely different in each of these three realms. And as she points out, those three realms aren't just weird aberrations of the Athenians or the Spartans that have been forgotten. Those are the same three realms that the whole medieval world was based on, and that the modern world is based on. We don't talk about it, we don't teach it, but you really can't understand the, modern political thinkers and what they're saying unless you know that they're taking it for granted. They're really assuming it. And then she uses this to analyze Marx in this book and future books. It's really interesting stuff. So she says the three realms, the three realms of the economy are the home, or according to the Greeks, that's the oikos, the market, and the Greeks call that the agora, and of course the governance, the realm of governance, or politics as the Greeks and the Romans conceive of it. These are three completely different realms, and to the Greeks, an example of the difference is that in the home, the parents, if the child is about to stick a fork in a power outlet, the parents can't say, let's all call for a vote about whether or not to stick a fork in a power outlet. The democracy is misplaced in a relationship in which some people are compos mentis and other people are not. Other people are still trying to figure out the basics, like, is this my hand? Why am I hitting myself? I mean, an infant doesn't even know his feet are his own feet. Who's kicking me? If you've ever, spent some time around babies, you realize that all these things we take for granted are hard-won victories they have to figure out. And if they're still working at the level of, wow, what's depth perception? You can't have a debate with them about how we should govern the household finances. And so there is an authoritarian relationship within a household between the adults and the children. And as the children grow up, you try to ease the authoritarianism back incrementally, commensurate with the growth and capacity and understanding of the children. The more they understand, the more they can govern themselves, the more you want to let them govern themselves and have a voice in the household. But at the point where every time they don't get a sucker, they throw a tantrum and try to smash things, this would not be a good time to give the child, the big red button with nuclear weapons. Throwing a tantrum, I just destroyed the world because I was so angry. Why should anything exist at all? I was just reading N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy. I don't know how many of you have read, it's a science fiction fantasy series. She won 3 back-to-back Hugo Awards 3 years in a row, which had never been done before for the series. So it's so original. But in the final book, there's a showdown between a mother and a daughter, and the daughter's 11 years old, but has these incredible powers. And she basically is traumatized and throwing a tantrum while she has stupendous, you must be kidding, the world is in danger levels of power. And the book confronts this problem of what happens when people who do not have themselves under control have gigantic resources for expressing their frustrations and angers. So in the oikos is a non-democratic environment in which democracy is titrated to the level that the people in it can handle. If they're all adults and they're all compos mentis, then sure, yeah, democracy, whatever. But when it's, the kid is still learning why you don't hit your sister over the head with a skateboard, maybe it's time to take the skateboard away, whether they like it or not, because sister has to be protected from this person's tantrums and the way they act out. She says, this is the opposite. She talks about this. And the Greeks extend this idea to a level that we would find extremely uncomfortable. And she's not afraid to talk about the disquieting, uncomfortable parts of this. They believed in slavery. The Greeks believed in slavery. They didn't believe in our kind of slavery, American slavery, industrialized chattel slavery. They would have found that appalling. But they had kinds of slavery that they absolutely believed in. They believed some people aren't able to make rational governance-oriented decisions, that they're very appetite-oriented, and all that they want is me, I. It's like the question of if you're recruiting someone to be a babysitter, do you hire the child molester? If we're all equal, then you should give the child molester a shot, right? But if we're not equal, if we have different characters, then you want to evaluate the person and their character to fit the thing that you would like them to do. And this is sort of the Greek approach. And they say there's limits to democracy in a context like that. But for governing, for action, like in Athens or even in Sparta, among the people who were the aristocracy, the belief was, whether true or false, what they believed was these are people who have themselves under control. These are people who they've learned to master their appetites. They have learned to master their ideologies and their emotions. They still have them. They listen to them, but they don't let those things be their master. They don't say, just because I'm angry, I got to punch somebody. They're like, I could be angry and nonviolent at the same time. Hey, this is like adult behavior. They say, when you have that kind of behavior, you start to become qualified for governance. And going to Donald's point earlier, it doesn't mean that any one of you is the person who should tell everybody else what to do. It means you could put a bunch of Aristoi in a room together and present them with a problem and expect some intelligent discussion to follow. Discussion that isn't all about, I wonder how I can rip everybody off, or I wonder how I get more power, which is what the Greeks believed people who are not suitable for governance would have on their minds. So, and the market is somewhere in between. The market is the place where people are learning crafts, how to be a good carpenter. how to be a plumber, how to be a programmer. They're mastering skills. There's sort of apprentice, journeyer, master series of relative expertise, and um, the goals in the market are different from the goals at home and are different from the goals of governance. Because the Acropolis, yes, my bad, Stephen. Thank you. So anyway, she explores how does decision making work in each of these three spheres of the economy. How and why does it work that way? Why are there differences? What happens if there aren't differences? She deals with issues of the private versus the public. What are the things that we share with others in the public realm? And why do we do that? And what are the things that we do not share, that we keep private? And why do we do that? And what happens, like in the modern world, when we start confusing the private and the public? And then we can't figure out why we're fighting all the time about stuff that doesn't matter. It's like, well, some things shouldn't be up for public debate, but we weren't clear about the distinction between private and public. So we just put it out there for a vote. And now we have people voting on things they have no business voting on because it's, my personal home life business. They should butt out. There's all kinds of confusion and chaos that happens in the modern world because we're not clear about how these different realms of the economy are different from each other. We try to treat them the same. Remember equality? All things are the same. It's a free-for-all. Everything's identical. And when we discover that it's not, we're just frustrated and exasperated and can't figure out why things happen the way that they do. So I'm going to talk about character types in a moment, but having established these three realms, she then explores what kind of people thrive in these different realms. And that's where the Greek character types come from, is this concept. Michelle, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I think Aristophanes and Socrates should have lived to see you being born because you seem like their love child, It seems like you have Socrates' sense of humor, Certainly, I think that, Aristotle, for example, he talks a lot about habits. Like, what is virtue? It is habits. So then what happens when you break the habit? Say a virgin is no longer a virgin. What happens to her after she has denied herself for 20 years and then suddenly felt joyful, felt something acclimating, and then, perhaps she's seeking that moment again and again. It's some kind of long-term drug addiction, and for most people, the first experience is probably they're going to be the best because they don't have any other experiences. So you have that lust-filled first encounter, and then afterwards you start treating everybody like they're somehow deficient. Somehow deficient with a first lust-filled encounter. But this is mixing a bit of Freud and Aristotle. So I'm just saying these people of habit, like what if something happens? Like what if you say, I like drinking my espresso every day. Like I am drinking my Nespresso from my Nespresso machine. What if one day they said, no more Nespresso machine? That's my habit. I like drinking it from my Nespresso machine. I like choosing flavors, including strawberry and cream, my favorite. If someone says, we're taking away your Nespresso machine, so you have that, these same people are based on habits, and a lot of times virtues are based on habits. Who is going to be a nun? Is it going to be some stunning Bollywood star? Is it going to be some stunning Miss Paradise? I mean, who's really going to be a nun? I mean, that's habit. That not just wearing a habit, but carrying on an immense chain of habits. And then, obviously you're at a vulnerable financial and reproductive position. So if you're thrown out and you cannot perform the habit, you are thrown out quite ruthlessly into the streets. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of the contradiction of the habits affects the fact that, one, if you find someone to say, well, we're happy to be virgins forever, most likely they're dealing with incredible poverty, and not many people who say, we don't want to understand anything, we just want to be, like, innocent. I mean, how many grown-up women are going to say but they want to be innocent until they're 99 years old? So, I think all of that stuff is, like, this complete crap. I mean, the church mostly recruited, virtue from people who are utterly deprived and had no other option. I mean, people who are pushing rocks, people who are forced to prostitute, to anyone and everyone, people with knives, people with dicks, people with everything. So you have this complete catastrophe that they're living, and suddenly, oh, you get a nice room, and you get this and that, and you get to wear clothes. You know, suddenly sex seems like a great emancipation.
Thank you, Michelle. The example of the espresso is a good one. I don't drink coffee, but I have plenty of friends who do. I have friends who absolutely cannot face the day unless they drink their coffee. Should we have a big vote about whether everybody's allowed to drink coffee or not? No. That doesn't belong in the realm of governance. That belongs in the realm of the home. It's, you know your needs and what it takes for you to pull together and be a functional human being better than I do. I should butt out. That's the private realm, right? And catastrophe follows when the governments start to think that they need to butt in people's homes and control every aspect of their life, every gesture, every sip they take from a cup. It's like, wait, what's in there? Did I give you permission to do that? It's like, no, you should have a healthy realm in which to exercise your agency without any interference from, the rest of the people. It doesn't matter if it makes somebody else angry that you have an espresso. If it doesn't harm anybody, they should butt out. They should get their anger under control. It's not their business. So these are the kinds of, and likewise, there's things, there's disciplines that if you're going to be a bridge builder, let's as an example of the marketplace and the agora, if you're going to master the craft of how to build bridges that don't fall down and kill a lot of people, that's the famous Galloping Gertie, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, is only about 35 miles from where I'm sitting, and if you've never Googled Galloping Gertie, you absolutely have to do it. It was a bridge built over a particularly difficult narrows in Puget Sound, and the wind set up a resonance and the bridge began visibly moving, and people thought it was cool. It was a tourist attraction. They drive across Galloping Gertie, and that was fine until the resonance got too strong and the whole bridge, it basically shook itself to pieces and fell into the Tacoma Narrows. Building bridges is serious business, and you have to go about that way of life as a bridge builder entirely differently from the way you go about your life in the morning. And do I want to have an espresso? Maybe I should have some tea. Maybe I like to hit the toilet first thing when I get up. I mean, whatever it is that I do to get up in the morning is idiosyncratic and up to me, and it's about managing my life. But it's totally different from what goes into how do you build something that doesn't fall down, where you have to learn the rules of the game and you have to have a lot of empirical basis to prove that you're using the right materials, that you put gaps in your bridge so it doesn't set up a resonance. I mean, things that we learned from Galloping Gertie, right? Don't build a perfect bridge or it'll become like a chord plucked on a harp. We learn these things, and then they have to become the shared rules or knowledge of the discipline of the agora. It's a different way of life, a different way of making decisions. And it has to be because the consequences are different. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you just partially answered everything. But basically thinking about how to think about these public and private, how you were going to actually define that. You were saying some things were off the table, and you actually just provided an example of that. But another interesting part that I'll add to that is that how not defining these two can undermine the trust within a country and within a community. And so that once you undermine the trust, then it makes it impossible to coordinate. And if it makes it impossible to coordinate, then you have totalitarian that is able to then maintain their power based off of that, because it keeps everything fragmented. So, for example, a practical example of this is in the Soviet Union, somebody, you'd be incentivized to rap on your neighbors, so to speak, or to inform on your neighbors if they did anything. So therefore, there's that element of, well, nobody's trusting one another. So, but it comes back to this public-private relationship that you were just mentioning. And I'm trying to just maybe clearly define those terms from my perspective. I mean, and just, I know you want to move on. So to uh, to the three areas that you had mentioned: the home, the market, the governance model. But if you could just maybe briefly expand on that.
Sure, yeah. It's Arendt does a very good job in The Human Condition of defining what she means by these terms. It's her book where she's retroactively going back to her analysis. Although it's not obvious on the surface, she's basically going back to her analysis from the origins of totalitarianism, and she's trying to supply all of her assumptions and definitions that she never supplied when she wrote the book. It was one of the criticisms she received is, okay, this is a great analysis of the Holocaust and Stalinism, but what do you mean by authority? What do you mean by power? What do you mean by politics? What do you mean by public and private? What do you mean by any of these terms? And so she's like, well, let's lay it out. Let's say, what is the structure of human society and how do all these terms manifest in it? Where, authority is different in the three realms. So public versus private is one of her main concerns. She talks about it in all of her works. And she says it's one of the things moderns are very confused about. We create societies in which we take stuff that everybody used to treat as private and we put it on display in public as a spectacle in order to attract discussion and controversy and hey, look at me. there's a not just talking about the 1960s or 1980s or 2000s. She says, going back to the 19th century, the 18th century, going back to the court of King Louis, and people bring out weird fashions in their heels and their hair and their so on. It was all part of a new kind of social movement where you're trying to draw everybody into discussing and debating and thinking about the life of the nobility. Who has the initiative in setting the fashions and who's following? They're all playing this kind of game of go around lifestyle. But all of this stuff was private stuff before. It was stuff that you dress how you dress. You do your hair how you do your hair. It's not, oh my God, what's everybody else doing? What did he do today that was different? And how quickly can I do it too? I don't want to be left out. So the cultures used to be different from that. Public versus private. Things like in the public realm, in the marketplace, caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. So, and you in the marketplace, you really only want people who are equipped for the battle of caveat emptor, who understand that the merchant might be lying to them. And even if they're not lying, they could be mistaken because maybe they got their stuff from some other merchant who lied to them. And they think that they're selling you prime goods when actually they're selling you, lettuce that's going to give you terrible diarrhea. Just to cite a in the news example. The marketplace is not a safe place for people who are too trusting. So little children do not belong in the marketplace. Advertising, Hannah Arendt talks about this clearly. This is one of the abominations of the modern world is all of the advertising we direct to young children who are not equipped to understand that no matter how colorful the little animated advertisement is, no matter how nice the jingle, no matter how many of their friends are buying that candy, it doesn't mean they should have it. It might really make them sick. And they need an adult to insulate them from that public realm. She says the private realm has a lot to do with creating the necessary preconditions for growth and development. And without growth and development, there's no next generation. So it's vitally important that the private realm be protected.
It's interesting how you actually are, linking Marx with other thinkers. And I was even thinking in terms of, people that would be diametrically opposed in as far as their solution is concerned, but their agreement on the problem. So the idea of the mercantile class and the exploitation of consumers. Marx and Adam Smith were both concerned about the mercantile class. They had different solutions as to how to solve that issue. One, thought that that they shouldn't be involved in public life at all because they could actually then essentially influence policy to benefit themselves. And then obviously there's, kind of with Marx's perspective is there, that the exploitation of workers, and that you're exploiting essentially that you're extracting from the workers. So, like in a way, there's both kind of worried about extraction of some sort from the from the general public, and that's coming back to your idea of almost where there seems to need to be certain protections in place. And that's just one idea. And the other thing is really quickly, I guess if everything is public, then nothing is sacred anymore, right? I mean, that would be another a part of that would actually then create, fragmentation of sorts, or monolithic thinking, I should say.
Yes, yes. That issue of privacy, not just for development and childhood and so on, but also privacy for the sacred. The idea that there are districts that are set aside for the gods and we can't go into them. And the Jews had that idea in the second temple of Jerusalem. You do not go past the veil and look at the Holy of Holies. That's for God. And it's for people, even among the priestly class, most of the time, they can't go in there either. Unless they go through the process of purification and get it all exactly right, then they can briefly go in there. And then they got to get out before they, contaminate it in some fashion. The Greeks had the same idea. The word for the fates, the moirai, moira, as discussed in F.M. Cornford's book, from Religion to Philosophy, a great book by one of the Cambridge ritualists. He talks about the fact that the term for moira originally refers to a district that was set aside for the gods, some part of the village that no villager was allowed to go into. This is where the shrines are. This is where maybe the holy grove is, and its purpose is to not be defiled by humans walking upon it. That notion of boundaries, that living a good life doesn't just consist of having the right values and virtues. It also consists of respecting the right boundaries, and that there are things that are for me, but there are also things that are not for me.
Right.
And knowing that they're not for me and protecting that not meanness quality of them is essential to the Greek concept of wisdom.
Right.
You see that in the way Heraclitus, not in any one place, but across his fragments, defines the good of sophrosune in terms of two different mental faculties. And one of them is phronesis, which I got to say, Hannah Arendt just educated me about in the human condition this morning while I was preparing for today's call. She says that the guy who wrote Paideia, Werner, now my brain wants to think of the German director Werner Herzog, but
Jaeger.
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 Thank you, Donald. Werner Jaeger.
All 3 volumes.
Yes, I have them all. He defines phronesis as knowledge of values. What are the important things to orient yourself towards? What are the things you should seek out and the positive wisdom, the things that you should orient towards? And that's interestingly specific. And he said that was the Greeks consider that the basis of politics. No one's capable of governing who doesn't have phronesis, who doesn't understand why these values are values and why we pursue them. But of course, Heraclitus says the other half is sophron, which we mistranslate as moderation. But Cornford says sophron is very specifically the wisdom of limits. Where are the places we will not go? What are the rights of other people that we will not trespass? What are the aritai of other people that we will not pretend we have when we don't? That staying, the negative wisdom of staying away from the things you're supposed to stay away from, Heraclitus says, is fully half of wisdom. And in the modern world, the only thing as Fitzgerald says, the only true religion of Americans is the green light. And we think there should be no limits. We want to be absolutely 100% free to do everything all the time, whenever we want, to anyone. And for that reason, this goes to this private-public thing that you're talking about. Part of privacy is about preserving what is mine. Part of privacy is preserving what is yours. But part of privacy is preserving what doesn't belong to any of us, whether it's a sacred grove or a wilderness area or what have you. that there are things that we should not meddle in. We should leave them alone. And if we don't believe that, we'll never be wise, because we'll blunder into everything like a bull in a china shop. So public-private, this is, you're asking, this is.
That's really, really well put. I very much appreciate that that distinction, and especially the idea of like kind of understanding the boundaries as part of wisdom. And as you said, a moment ago, it's often even when we're talking about the virtues in other groups, the idea of temperance, there's really no good translation for that.
We don't have a word.
So we don't have a word for it, and so and that is obviously essential to understanding human development, what it really means to flourish per se. That you have those boundaries in place, because there has to be a certain amount of healthy individual autonomy, and essentially it can be practiced in those circles. So anyway, I really appreciate that clarification on several different levels.
Thank you, Joe. Of course, I'm cheating because it was just a coincidence that was what the current chapter I was listening to this morning was talking about. But I got to say, when she said, hey, Werner Jaeger says that phronesis is this and it's the basis of politics, I had to race across the room and press pause and go, what? I'd never heard this definition before. We've talked about phronesis for years, but I'd completely missed it. And it's, highly relevant. So, Michelle, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I feel like there's a famous quote by Epictetus. A person is a slave who cannot talk. And like traditionally, most people have been slaves. I mean, even though in America, most people really can't talk. Like they say they use N-word in a coffee shop. That's the end of their job. They complain about too many Somalians invading their space. Well, you're racist, I mean, people obviously have very little freedom of speech, because they can track you down. Like, they tracked down Mamdani's mayor's wife, who was saying a lot of crazy shit, and they had it all on Reddit, and they're all saying, like, okay this, okay that. I mean, he's probably not going to serve a second term. They hate her. So, I mean, all of New York hates her. I mean, her and her weird snake-shaped body, like a snake body and a head of a woman. I mean, it's pretty funny that she thinks she's the mayor, too, of New York. It's pretty funny that Mamdani can not tell between a woman and a snake. It's pretty pathetic that New York is sinking on its knees. I mean, New York has traditionally been the slave market. That's why they attract girls there. They use them as boys, because boys are hidden safely. They're too afraid of a lawsuit, and the girls are used, like, not just with Epstein. I mean, the girls who got Epstein were relatively lucky. Think about getting some hogwash man who says nothing true, as Aristophanes used to say about Socrates, and see who they get. See who they get. I mean, many people have traveled to New York, and they're like, why is this girl waving her butt in the air, and no one's doing a damn thing? Because New York thrives on the idea they're selling sex constantly. It's just adjacent to Vegas. I mean, we get to see how much silence these people who start off as child prostitutes are when they never went to school, because they were hooking at age 3. I mean, between age 3 and age 18, and finally went public with their porn at age 18, though they had been making it since age 3. I mean, you see the contradictions and the conflations of our century when we talk about talk, and yet we talk about silence as well. And I would say for the most people in the population, they're even afraid to say, I don't want my house to get ransacked by a Somalian person. I mean, if you say that in Minnesota, where the protector, what's his name, Jacob Frey, Mayor Jacob Frey, say anything bad about Somalians, wow, something bad's gonna happen to you. I mean, it's the police can come after you. They can kill you. You make one racist statement on the phone with police, they can definitely send someone over to kill you. I mean, countless numbers of people have died trying to say things. We're not living in America. We're living in Stalinism, where people get shot for a poem, where people lose their jobs, which is essentially the same thing. So, like, how many people have the privilege to say things? I would say, Rick, you definitely have the privilege to say things, and maybe you should make yourself famous one day. I mean, you kind of really have what it takes to be a late night talk show hosts, maybe, I think you'd be a lot better. There's no one left, and they all have turned ugly, so that definitely gives you, a lot of plausibility. And then you in a suit, you and doing this, I think would be quite good on national TV, and less so when you make it to national TV.
Yeah, I have no desire to be a public figure at all. When we look at what counts as public in America, it's a shit show. I mean, just people go after each other for everything. I didn't understand when I was younger the kind of distinctions that Arendt is making between the public and the private realms. But it's not hard to look at some of the stuff that's going wrong in U.S. society and see that some of it is around these issues. What's for sale that should not be for sale? Who are we having govern us who's not fit to govern? Likewise, the introduction of the marketplace into the nursery, into children being peddled to as sources of profit. There's all kinds of stuff that we do that previous epochs would have seen as. It's not that they never did things wrong. Kenneth is certainly not trying to say we're the devil and all the previous epochs were good. He's trying to say we think we're the best and the brightest when actually we're just another epoch and that we have our blind spots. There are things that we fumble that other epochs didn't fumble very often. And one of them is around this weird stuff. Yeah, we'll come back to it in a bit, but I kind of want to drive us towards the character types. But first, Josh, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind. Good to hear from you. Got to find your mute button, though.
I found it. Yeah, on this issue of the private and the public, I want to maybe raise some concerns about how the distinction between the two might think to justify itself on the basis of some criterion which is not itself bound up with some normative set of assumptions. So first of all, even in making the distinction, so private thoughts and private feelings and private attitudes on the parts of individuals, if we assume that they're not in some sense already bound up with a social milieu in which our very sense of what makes sense to us is shaped, then you end up with too reified a distinction. And on the other hand, use an example within the public realm of, say, in the marketplace, of people who are too trusting. And if you are associating that with a notion of character, which again is a private notion, which doesn't itself maybe appreciate to what extent something as supposedly private as character is itself already shaped within larger normative social discursive structures, then you'll miss potential ways in which you are imposing a certain set of norms on public structures like the marketplace. So instead of simply making it a private feature of someone's internal character that they just so happen to be too trusting, you could have entire societies in which a certain value of trust is implicit in the way that they approach their public dealings. And then there's a danger in then saying, oh, well, we can apply in the same way that we've applied to the individual a judgment about character or a weakness in character that we can use normatively in an objective sense, in a universal sense. In the same way, we can make that same judgment and apply it to that society, that society has got it wrong. But if what constitutes the correct and the incorrect way of being is itself bound up with social structures, and the social structures evolve and change on the basis of the fact that the just living and working through our participation in those structures, in those discursive structures, in those social structures, is going to lead to alterations and changes, so that the world that we're carving up um, and begins to then feed back on us, and then we discover that that leads to adjustments in those norms. I guess what I'm getting at here is that um, there's a way of not losing a certain way of being able to say, well, um, there's a better way of doing things. Not losing it, but at the same time, not giving up too much of an appreciation of the fact that whenever we are inclined to make that judgment, that we be more careful about uh, how our own um, basis of judgments are themselves shaped contingently, right, within a particular way of living that we may not understand how that way of living may not apply to some other group over there, or some other individual over there. The child isn't just a less ignorant version of an adult, because we've gone through this and child development studies and the works of many authors, uh, you know, including Merleau-Ponty, that caution against that, and caution against how we want to apply that authoritarian impulse, such that we don't squelch the fact that they're not just incomplete versions of adults, but that there are legitimate um, questions that they have about how to make sense of the world, which isn't simply a weaker or a more limited version of the conclusions that we've arrived at as adults. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Your call for nuance is right on. Even in the Greek model, and certainly in the way that Arendt is talking about it, and that Kenneth talks about it, there's all these feedback loops. Feedback loops within feedback loops within feedback loops. It's not just that the culture shapes the people. It's not just that the people shape the culture. It's that it's a dialectic, and it goes back and forth. And that introduces once as Donald will attest, when you're writing software and you get to where you have loops or recursion, when things feed back on themselves, it can get astonishingly complex very fast. It's hard for us to in fact, it's basically impossible for us to trace all of the interdependencies that go on between the mind of a developing child, their parents, and the larger culture around them. It's back and forth, and it's central to Hannah Arendt's philosophy. Of her maybe dozen most core ideas, one of them is this concept of natality versus mortality. She says philosophers for thousands of years and theologians have focused on us as mortals, as the, oh, we're going to die, they've got to prepare for dying. What does it mean that we're going to die? Blah, 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 die, 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 die. And she says, what's stupid about that, it's not that it doesn't matter, but what's stupid about that is if all we did was die, there wouldn't be any people. We are also born. And nobody wants to talk about that. She says natality is just as important to human identity as mortality. We're natals as much as we're mortals. And part of what it means to be natals is that we bring something, each new person who is born brings something absolutely new into the world. You don't know how much they're going to acculturate. As you say, there's negotiation that they have to do. They're not just learning to be an adult. They're not just an ignorant person being filled with knowledge, but they're also negotiating. How much of this do they agree with? And how much of it is just batshit crazy and everybody agrees with it because they've all been indoctrinated? But the new kid says, you know what? You're all batshit crazy. The emperor's wearing no clothes. This has to change. She says it's part of why every model of history that says that history follows predetermined cause and effect predictable sequences is bullshit. She says history is a dialectic between a default unfolding of cause and effect, constantly wrestling with the miracle of new people making their own new choices about how they want to relate to that history. And sometimes they choose in brilliant ways that move things better. And sometimes they choose in horrific ways that move things worse. But in either case, they make choices that no historian could have predicted. And she says, she knows that people don't like it. Historians don't like it. They want it to be predictable. They want it to be simple. They want it to be something you can give as an elevator pitch. Here's how history works. She says, but reality just doesn't work that way. And thank goodness. Because if it was all cause and effect, then what are we? Cogs in a machine, disposable, of no importance whatsoever? She says, of course we matter. Our choices matter. And so the child is going through that natal process of finding their place in the world and deciding how much of it are they going to go along with and how much of it are they going to resist or even change. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant point you make, Josh. It's very important. And the thing is, you know, a child, like all of us, but even more obviously, a child is a work in progress. And you don't want to jar their arm too much while they're trying to get the work there. It's like Rembrandt sits down, begins a sketch, and you yank it out of his hands. The pencil mark now races across the page as you pull it away, and you go, "How come this isn't finished? Where's the color? You suck, Rembrandt." There is a process of development that things have to go through before they're ready to be chewed on in the public realm, and that applies to people as well, where they're trying to figure things out. I'm always put in the mind of people who are theorists of brainstorming and creativity talk about the fact that brainstorming is important and criticism and editing are important. But if you try to do them at the same time, you can't do either one well, because brainstorming requires a positive feedback loop. You need to just follow the ideas and see where they lead you. And if you're constantly cutting off every idea because it's imperfect, well, of course it's imperfect. Every new idea is imperfect. Now you have a blank canvas and you haven't done any damn thing. It's one of the things that typifies TV shows or movies that are created by committee is they get in there and they start editing before they even have an idea that's clear. And you get this milksop, milk toast compromise work of art that isn't interesting in any way because they're all afraid to take a risk. So the private realm is partly about creating a space within which to explore ideas, explore who you want to become, you know, drink a coffee in the morning if you need to wake up. You know, it's like there's you need a realm within which to be yourself and explore things without constantly being evaluated by the public. But the relationship between private and public is complex, and as you say, culturally mediated. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Since this is a story about the extermination of the Aristoi, the brilliant example, of course, in comedy is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Arthur comes up against the anarchist peasants. Who is the lord in that castle? Nobody. We have committee meetings. We have all the answers. We found the answers by exterminating the Aristoi. And then Arthur starts going on about the things that make him an Aristoi. You know, the Lady of the Lake, her arm clad in purest shimmering samurai, held aloft Excalibur, which made me king. And then immediately the anarchist peasant reduces it to a set of political axioms. You're talking nonsense, you know. Just because some moistened bint threw a sword at you, you say you're king. And the whole story about the knights in Monty Python, of course, is to reach the Holy Grail. They have to go through a series of murderous tests. The killer rabbit, the bridge of death, as the scientific knight says to Arthur, "How do you know so much about science?" It's part of being a king.
He's like the psychopathic.
Yes.
This is the thing that in this Arthurian myth is the lost qualities of the Aristoi, which were lost in the Dark Ages. How do I find them? There's a literal element. Clovis, the leader of the Franks, was asked by, I think it was a bishop of one of the Christian bishops in France, that one of their holy relic had been looted, a vase from the church, and they really wanted this back, so he had to go on a quest and find it. Unfortunately, the Frank who had it smashed it to prove that you can't have it back, that everything is handed out, the loot is handed out to the army. So there was a literal example of this. But the story of the search for the Holy Grail is you're going to have to face the unexpected. You're going to have to really jump some hurdles. You're no longer in Camelot where you've worked everything out. You've got all the answers in Camelot, where your answers are going to fail in the wilderness. You're in for the great struggle. Thank you.
Arthur has all of these beautiful pet phrases to justify his kingship, and he's surrounded himself with people who all nod and agree with him. Oh yes, the Lady of the Lake. Oh yes, Excalibur. And what he doesn't have is he's never actually taken those ideas in front of people who don't respect those ideas at all. The public realm, other people with other ideas. And you know, the very first time he does, I that scene you quote, Stephen, I love it so much because he starts out trying to be so noble, but by the end of the conversation, he has completely lost it, and he's striking the peasant. Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Because the guy keeps asking questions that Arthur can't answer. It doesn't want to think about, and this is what happens when we bring our cherished private ideas out into the public realm for the first time. We've never.
Well, there's the French as well.
Yeah, and the experience with the French on the wall. Yes, we got one of those around the back. What? No, you don't. It's like, yes, you know, it is a more contentious, competitive realm, the public realm. The Greeks believed that kind of, you know, eris, strife. One of the goddesses of the Greeks is Eris, who represents strife. We always say it represents strife, but Hannah Arendt and Cornford and others will tell you not just any strife, it's the good strife, because the Greeks liked competition. They loved it. I mean, these are the people who started the Olympic Games. They're obviously they're very interested in creating venues that give people opportunities to try to compete with others and show what their arete are. What can you do? What are you excellent at? But you know, if you're going to get out there and try to prove that you've got some excellence, that means you have to be willing to take a few knocks when you discover the other guy can jump higher than you can, and some other guy is able to throw the discus further. And you can't lose your mind and start striking peasants around you when that happens. You have to be able to go, okay, I'm not who I thought I was. I'm part of a bigger world that has more stuff going on than just me and my ego. And people who are not ready for that, who can't handle that, don't belong in the public realm, according to the Greeks. This is, you know, they need to incrementally work their way up to be able to behave well when they're under that kind of pressure. It's like in martial arts. You don't start people out sparring. They got to learn how to be safe, and they got to learn the basic techniques. And you start with little pre-scripted drills. And only then do you slowly let them into sparring, because, you know, you just drop a little kid prone to temper tantrums in a sparring match with a adult black belt, and it's not going to be good for either one of them. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I wanted to share a little bit about something we talked about. Now it's a little while back, but we were getting into things that are equal, or the idea of equality, and I liked this, that we were trying to break down equality not equaling sameness. When math, it's like, you know, talking about from a math point of view, or I often think of like something like the Wilfrid Sellers distinction between the manifest image and the scientific image. That in the scientific image, same and equal are the same. You can put it on the left side of the equation, you can put it on the right side of the equation. It's the same symbol. You need to be able to work with it, and it has to follow the same rules. And this to me also brings back something we didn't talk about, but I feel always gets smuggled in when equality tries to work within a mechanistic approach, like the scientific approach. That's like the major failure mode of the I forget the author, but the why a cat is not a toaster. That often we use these systems for very mechanical things, and think that, you know, we're talking about people or human organizations, and we automatically think that like the systematic approach is going to be totally fine because it's a good system and all these objects will work perfectly. But humans are not objects, and yeah, so it's so interesting how we forget. But I wanted to bring in where, at least the way I understand equality, is I think a nuanced conversation of the dialectic between the particular and the universal, which is kind of like the, you know, maybe more up. There's a lot of ways of arguing this, but it seems like it's the most upstream thing of equality versus inequality, or individual versus group, or in this public versus private. They all seem to relate to where the particular and the universal are a dialectic, and they're not black and whites. They blend into each other. They require each other. And it's something as simple as all truth is individual because all experience is individual. There's no way around it. It's like, if we all want to claim something of truth, it's because our individual particular nature was able to agree and validate and establish that truth. Yet something like gravity, we would also want to agree that from a mechanistic point of view, gravity is not an individual truth. It's a universal, right? There's certain things like that we describe as objects in the sort of objectification versus subjectification that is valid. Like trees are trees, people are people. So in this way, equality makes sense when there's a useful category. And I think the best example, when someone like John Locke says we're all equal, he's not talking about, you know, some guy's a farmer and some guy, therefore everybody else has to be a farmer. He's talking about equality under the law. This is a totally different use. That in this category, it's like we are all individuals. To get back to Monty Python, but I'm not, is this idea that the ability to be individuals is something we all universally want to promote. But then to be an individual explicitly means that I'm not equal because my thing is different than your thing, right? To be equal is not the same. And so it's again, I feel like maybe it's just English sucks. I feel like we always come back to this, that language in an impoverished era, you get like a silver version of Latin where it's all exploitative and about manipulating and maybe being a sophist, while in like a golden version of Latin, you could have it actually being more nuanced and robust and actually apply to different things. But we have a word like equal, and be like, I'm equal to you. We're like, okay, well, if we're going before a judge and we committed a similar crime, yes, we should be equal under the law. But was my act the same as your act? No, I was in a different place in a different time. And this gets also like physics has this problem, like time. Okay, my 5 minutes should be worth your 5 minutes. If we're both getting paid $1 a minute, then I should get $5 and you should get $5, right? That's that system. But if it's something like, okay, my experience of 5 minutes was vastly different than yours because I learned something different in my brain. My neuroplasticity was totally different while you were asleep, right? That's a totally different neuroplasticity sort of statement. That's a totally different claim. Right. So we have our words are almost like, I feel like maybe it's not the right way to go with this argument, but the big failure oftentimes for, I think it was maybe Josh, I don't remember who said this, but like, how do these really smart people fall into this really simple trap over and over and over? It's something about the systematizing gets confused that we want to have, we actually are talking about different systems with different categories and different definitions of language. And we want to do that ideology thing that maybe Stephen likes to complain about so much, is where we can reduce everything to one type of ideology. And then equal is doing too many jobs. The word equal is wearing too many hats. And therefore now you've broken your own internal ideology because you've got equal meaning something that it also can't mean. And whenever you get to that situation, it's not that it's a failure. It's more like, oh, we're going back to life, and life is full of paradoxes. Life is a paradox. And as soon as we get something contradicting itself, we don't have a break in the system. We have the beginning of a dialectic, right? And so this is where I feel like, again, the modern era can't handle this type, because maybe it's things like memory. We can't handle all of this nuance. It's too much going on. The complexity makes us feel too uncertain, and then we have to fall back into like in battle where
Very good.
where I've got my I sleep in what is it, a foxhole. We're all in our foxholes, right? But there's something about I took some notes, and I'll say like this before before I give back the things that I wanted to share were, there's
Oh, you're locking up a little bit, Ari.
oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking the ability to have a unique experience is something we all want equally. But what that unequal experience is by definition should not be equal. If it's trying to be the same as something else, then it destroys the original attempt of equality, is to give us some inequality, right? So it's a weird paradox between equality and inequality that goes right back to like particulars and universals, and something like intersubjectivity. If life and everything is intersubjective, that means the subjective depends on the objective and the objective depends on the subjective. We have to keep them straight. And it's something like I was writing down that it seems like when this breakdown happens, you have a failure, either something along the lines of a spiritual or a physical version of the tragedy of commons, where when the spiritual version of, and this is more like Stephen's idea of spirit, not like hopefully a religious version, but like the Hegel version of spirit, when spiritual equality breaks down, or spiritual sacred breaks down, there's something about a tragedy of the commons where one person exploits or grabs, and that reduces trust and reduces social capital. Similar to the way that when someone overgrazes with their cow, that distributes the cost among the whole, and then there's a physical degradation. And it's like the inheritance of our stocks, which are inheritance of like systems, whether they're being like social systems of coordination, physical systems of like energy and resources. Those break down when you have this failure of distinction between categories of like what's sacred and what's
Profane.
available for everything. Yeah, what's plain and common. And it's and I feel like again that comes back to private and public. We don't understand how to hold the these things different, and that also sounds like again a failure of understanding when and how particulars should work and how universals should work. And it's something weird, like it's not that they just act separately. The only way to understand them is in some sort of relationship. And I think it might not be so clear what I'm saying, but I'll try to end it. It's like nothing in biology makes sense except from the narrative of evolution. When you see evolution taking place, you see this type of mutation happening or this adaptation happening as a survival mechanism. It's like it all starts to make sense. But if you want to talk about them as like cogs in a machine that just happen to be there, it doesn't really work. It sort of breaks down. But when you see things in a relationship, like how the universal serves the particular, or how the individual serves the group, or how the group serves the individual, I think I often land back at like Rabbi Sachs's definition of this is like the I and the we. The dialectic between the I and the we needs to hold, because without that, then the I collapses into the we, and the we collapses the I, and they both break down. And it's like a healthy I strengthens the we, and a healthy we strengthens the I. Again, going back to like your Hannah Arendt, there's the three areas where there's a family, where the individual within the family is strengthened if the family does well, and similarly in politics, the individual does well if the I wouldn't call it a market, but the cooperation space there works well. And similarly between like a merchant, when the merchant does well, it's when the market does well, and they need each other. It's like an organism and their environment. If they're modeling their environment well, then the organism and the environment are going to thrive together with this sort of like alignment. And I can end with like, it's just that it seems like language is kind of, it seems to me like language is the big problem. If I was going to anything, like we don't know how to use our language so well anymore for communicating with others or ourselves, and knowing how to do it differently. And that comes to us like that exploitation of a person, like what you said, why you could never be a public person. I imagine you would love being like many of us would love being a public person. We felt that our private lives were not only sheltered, but then they were elevated. If our private life was actually like improved because we did something public, we're like, yeah, I want to do that. But because we know we're like throwing that in the garbage, as soon as we enter the public sphere, it's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. So, okay. Yeah, I rambled. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ari. It's always a pleasure. Well, Before we get to the remaining two questions, we are in the third hour. I'd like to get us into the meat of the three types, because they're the topic. And this has all been wind up, right? It takes a while to get to the thing we want to talk about. So the Greeks, this thing about the Greek character types that's most important to keep in mind is that they didn't originally develop it in order to tell the truth. They originally developed it in order to rationalize an unequal system that they established by conquest. They had conquered and enslaved people, and now they had to explain to themselves and to their children and their children's children, why do I deserve to have rights that the people that I've enslaved don't have? How do I justify explaining that those people are treated worse than we are? So because it started out as an act of justification, and this is in the distant past, we don't have the earliest bits of this. It started out fake, but it had to be persuasive. You know how kids are when they ask questions. New generations come along and they're like, but I like Bobby. Why is Bobby a slave? And then they had to come up with better and better explanations. And as they did that, they began shifting. They couldn't just come out and say, well, I'm a terrible person. I had a sword and I stuck it in Bobby's dad. And so everybody surrendered and now I have Bobby as a slave. This is not a very good justification. And maybe to an earlier, cruder generation, that's enough. But to later generations, you have to make it seem like there's a good reason why Bobby should have different rights than you have. And so they began a search for what would justify treating people differently. And along with that came a search for what kinds of people are there and what are they like, and which ones deserve to be slaves and which ones don't deserve to be slaves. And the result was that you ended up in Greek culture with a split. And it's the most important split to keep in mind when you're thinking about these character types. There's the split between the actual political economic roles in society, i.e., somebody's a slave because we've given them that role. That's the role they're stuck in. And that's what makes them a slave. And it says nothing about their character. I might want it to. I might accuse them of things, but the truth is the reason they're a slave is because they're a slave. And the reason that this oligarch calls himself an Aristos is because he has all the money and power. Haha. So, you can't stop me. So I'm an Aristos. It begins with that. And those roles remain present all the way through Aristotle and beyond. But in their quest to rationalize it, they discover some things about human nature. And then they try to line the two up so that the things they learned about human nature justify their political economy. And this is where it gets really interesting. So they basically initially they had a society that primarily had the two distinctions, the ruled and the rulers, the slaves and the free people. But over time, they began to become skeptical about the marketplace. They said, a number of Greek writers talk about this problem, that when you become very good at being a merchant in ancient Greece and you're successful and you're gaining a lot of wealth, you can't help but notice that the more wealth you have, the more comfortable you are. And it leads to a natural desire for more and more and more with no limits. And a number of Greeks writers talk about this. They said the biggest problem with the marketplace is that people forget that the purpose of trade is friendship. And they start to think that the purpose of trade is to win and to have everything and to take everything. And they say, and that's an enormous danger. And so ideally, people whose way of life involves thinking about other people as potential resources or money should not have the vote. They should not govern. Because if you put them in charge, all they're going to do is figure out how many people they can enslave or cheat or what have you. That these people are not fit to govern. And this becomes a third caste, which we'll talk about in a second. Likewise, the thing about slaves in ancient Greek society, in some cases you could tell by looking that somebody was slave or somebody was free. But famously, the king of Persia was frustrated by what he saw in Athens, because when he looked around, everybody looked pretty much the same. He couldn't tell which people were slaves and which ones weren't, because in Athens, at least in the city itself, in the polis itself, the distinction was you're a slave if you can't vote. Not voting is what makes you a slave. And because you don't vote, you're being represented by somebody else, which is interesting because that Athenian model would suggest almost every American citizen is a slave in the sense that most of the time we don't get a vote. It's our representatives that vote. And all we get to do is vote for representatives. But when it comes to actual issues that affect our lives, we pretty much have no say. And the Athenians would say, yeah, that's slavery. Sure, you can cast your ballots for who's going to represent you, but that's the only free person. The rest of you are just, along for the ride. So the word slave, is not even the word they're using. They have a number of different words for slave. When we translate into English, like Ari was alluding to, we lose a lot of nuance. A whole bunch of the distinctions are lost in modern English that were present in the Greek. So they sort of have this idea that works like this. There are the people whose lives revolve around the household. And for the Greeks, the household includes an estate. You've got a farm, you've got gardens, you've got animals, you have fences, you have a well, you have these resources that you have to manage so that all the people who are in that household are able to eat and drink and sleep safely, and they can clothe themselves and so forth. These are what they call the necessities of life. And the people whose whole lives revolve around that, the oikos, the home, they called them douloi, which is one of their words for slaves. The people whose lives revolve instead around the marketplace, who, yeah, they have a home, but they leave the home frequently to go work in workshops, to do craftsmanship, and possibly to engage in mercantile activities. These people they called banausoi. And they are also slaves, but they're artisans and merchants rather than what we might call domestic slaves or household slaves. And in both cases, there's the question of where they appear and how much we see them. But from the Greek characterological perspective, the important thing is what happens to you as psychologically, characterologically, when you spend your life doing certain kinds of work. The philosopher Heraclitus actually has a line about this, where he says, it's wearying, it injures you to keep doing the same thing over and over and over, because then it begins to rule you. Your modes of thinking and your modes of behavior, rather than being an individual, you start to become a sort of prosthesis for the job that the job uses to get itself done when you think too much that way. Human beings need to have a variety of experiences in order to have a rich mind and to be genuinely free. And if all we always do is the same thing, we sort of become that thing. Like in modern world, when someone says, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a doctor. What you mean is, so much of my life is involved in being a doctor that it has changed me. And I don't think the same way, and I don't feel the same way, and I don't see the world the same way as an electrician who sees the world very differently, or a nuclear physicist, or an anesthesiologist. These people all experience the world differently. They see the world differently, and they think and feel differently over time. We sort of recognize that, but the Greeks recognized it early on. And then Aristoi, would be, the people with the vote, people who govern. These are the distinctions they're originally making on an economic level to the roles that they have. But to justify it, they're investigating the question of what is the nature of the well, Stephen's point is well told. Intellectual types are not Aristoi. Intellectual types are banausoi. They're people, and we'll get into why that is next, right now, before I call on people. I'm just going to get us through the initial three types, and then I'll call on folks. The thing about these three castes, if you will, in the economy is that they correspond to different combinations of two faculties of the mind that the Greeks believed we're all born with. And over time, over the centuries, the Greeks changed their terminology. So if you're trying to look for consistency, does Plato use these words exactly this way? Does Aristotle use them exactly this way? Xenophanes? The answer is no. They're futzing around with the words that they have in Greek, trying to find the right way to express this. So we've sort of standardized it in the modern world. We've standardized our use of the Greek to refer to these faculties more than the Greeks themselves did. But they add the concepts, even if they wrestle with the words a bit. The first concept, so the idea is that there are two basal faculties of your mind's metabolism. that we're all born with, that we all have. And one of these faculties is called gnosis. And this is raw experience, feelings, sensations, memories. It's immersive, like a flow. And it is concrete and detailed, right? You smell cloves, you taste chai tea, which is, I guess, a redundant statement on my part. You see the rainbow, the colors of the rainbow light up, and there's a part in your body that goes, "Whoa! Look at those colors." There is a gnosis is how every human being is born as an infant, where every experience is as strong as it could possibly be, because there's no part of you that isn't immersed. When when a little kid stubs their toe, it's the worst pain they've ever felt in their life. In their very short life, it's the worst pain they've ever felt. Or the first time they put a sucker in their mouth, it's the most delicious thing they've ever had. Nothing in the universe could ever be this tasty. Everything's turned up to 11. I often use the phrase that I think I borrowed from Kenneth Smith. They're a live wire. Everything completely affects them. And the result is, since all of their attention is on what is happening, they don't have any room left to have a separate sense of self. Their sense of self is the immersion in what's happening. And as a result, gnosis is what's called a whole forming faculty. The individual is merged into the flow of experience, and they are those experiences. Gnosis is extraordinarily subjective in the sense that you feel so much, but it is also extraordinarily objective in the sense that when things happen around you, you really notice them and care. You are very focused on what's actually happening as you perceive it. So gnosis defies our usual categories of objective and subjective. But as we'll see, other people will want to call it subjective and dismiss it with contempt as being the source of all bad things. The truth, according to Hegel, is far more complicated. It's good things and bad things at the same time. The second faculty is noesis, and noesis is insulated thought, separated thinking, reasoning, logic, math, learned patterns of thought and behavior. It is systems, mastering systems and climbing social and economic ladders. It is abstractivizing, and it is universalizing. It can where gnosis has a raw, naive gnosis has a tendency to be parochial, right? The infant thinks what it's experiencing is the sum total of all life everywhere. Someone engaged in noesis is able to separate themselves from that stream of experience. In fact, they have to separate themselves from that stream of experience in order to engage in noesis. So otherwise they'd be interrupted all the time by, oh, I stubbed my toe. What's that sound outside? Who's that talking in the next room? And the noesis requires quiet and separation in order to do what it does. But it means that it's able to step out of the immediate parochial flow of experience and generalize and think about what other people might be feeling or thinking about. It can think not just about what's happening now, but what happened last week or what's going to happen a month from now. It's able to be predictive, and most of the qualities that we identify, as Stephen alluded to, most of the qualities we identify with intellect are noetic qualities. Modern civilization is obsessed with noesis. Our law codes are noetic. Ken, you're heading out. Okay, we'll catch you next time. I'm glad you're having a good time with this. So our economy is based on math and numbers and statistics, interest. This is all very noetic. Our legal system is based on rules that apply to situations. We have to be able to treat people not as who they really are, but as categories that can plug into these law codes. You're the category of people who did this act under these circumstances, and therefore, these laws now apply to you. And now the court of law can perform a calculation in order to determine what a just outcome would be involving you. All of this is noesis. And Hegel says, on the one hand, without noesis, we would be lost in the moment. We would, the temper tantrums are a characteristic of the infant because they don't have perspective to understand that actually this isn't the worst thing. Stubbing their toe, not being allowed to go eat ice cream with their friends is not actually the worst thing that ever occurred in the history of the world. There might be really important reasons not to go. And, your toe's going to be fine. Just rub it a little bit. You're okay. You didn't break it or anything. Perspective and context come from noesis. And so it's natural for us to think, well, then noesis is the good faculty and gnosis is the childish faculty. And thank God we all grew up and we don't do gnosis anymore. But as Hegel says, right, let's actually put this in the chat. To abstract is to be in error. To abstract is to be in error. Noesis is an abstractivizing function. And the reason to abstract is to be in error is that when I deal with you not as who you are, but as a Black person or a Jew or a woman or whatever, I have erased almost all of you. The concrete lived experience of you, I have suppressed it, and I've replaced you with an empty category. And I'm now determined to treat you as though you equal that category. And the problem with doing that is no human being is actually abstract. We are actually concrete, real people with real qualities that matter. One Jew and another Jew are not the same Jew. Hannah Arendt might be Jewish, but she's not Felix Mendelssohn. They're two different people. They have completely different life experiences. And those life experiences, in order to treat people justly, Plato says that Socrates says you have to do justice to the rights of the question. What are the actual particulars in front of us? To say, well, I don't want to deal with that. I want to deal with this cartoon version that I have in the land of theory in my head is to commit an injustice. Somebody beat somebody half to death. And the only report they have to go on is it's a man and he's Black. And so they arrest Martin Luther King Jr. What? He's a man, he's Black, he must have done it. This is abstraction. This is noesis in action. It's treating a concrete person who could not possibly have done this thing like an empty abstract category characterization of the person who actually did do it. And then equating the two. You're equal, right? And God knows if the guy was even Black, right? The witness might have been a bigot. So there's all these issues when we move into the realm of abstraction. And Hegel says, on the one hand, it's our superpower that lets us predict the future and design houses and civilizations. And on the other hand, it's why we do holocausts and world wars and commit ecocide. I mean, all this stuff is based on the idea that it's okay for us to suppress the concrete details of reality in order to gain the power of being able to have wide-ranging abstract thoughts. It's a sword with two edges, and it cuts us at the exact same time it cuts the thing we're trying to cut. So the Greek take, and Hegel puts this into great perspective in the Phenomenology of Geist and the Philosophy of Geist, his two big works about the way that the mind and spirit works. Hegel says, the reason that evolution gives us both of these faculties is that we need both of these faculties. Science at its best allows us to engage in noesis to theorize about why things happen, but compels us to leash our thinking to gnosis. We must actually submit our ideas to the test and give concrete, specific reality the opportunity to prove us wrong. And if we don't do that, then we're just racing off down into la la land. Like, you see in Hollywood, they always show the people who've gone cracked and crazy, have the boards on the wall with all the pictures and all the strings between leading from this to that to the other, and it's all a great conspiracy. And what's happening is that they've unhinged themselves from reality, chasing into the land of theory and possibilities. The concrete details of what's actually happening, they're like, well, I don't want to look at that. I like my theory better. So I'm just going to pretend all of this is happening. And Hegel says that's what happens when you over intellectualize. You overgeneralize and you start committing enormous blunders on a gigantic scale. And of course, the problems with raw gnosis are obvious because you get these parochial people who can't think beyond their own life. They've never thought about anything beyond their own experiences. They're trapped. They're prisoners of their parochialism. And they're also way too emotional. Today they love you, tomorrow they hate you. It all depends on their mood. You know, it's like you can't build a civilization based on these kind of bipolar extremes of, you know, this is the best thing ever. No, 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 it's terrible. We must destroy it. You know, there's this tension between these things. And Hegel and the Greeks say the mature adult form of the human mind is when you don't let either your gnosis or your noesis rule you. Instead, you leash both of them to each other. So every time you have an intellectual idea, you submit it to the discipline of evidence. Let's go see what experience has to say about your beautiful idea. And whenever you draw wild conclusions from your experiences, you discipline that with logic and math and systematic thinking. Okay, yes, I have these wild ideas, but do any other carpenters build a house out of pudding? And if not, maybe I should find out why nobody else does it that way. I should look at the systems of the education, the teaching, the learning, and see if maybe that tells us there's a reason why nobody tries to build a house out of pudding. Maybe it doesn't have the structural stability. It doesn't matter if I had this epiphany. My epiphany might just be me being all excited about the moment of gnosis and disregarding what the noesis could tell me to correct my misunderstanding of my own experience. So this is where the character types come from, is how do we use these faculties? And it goes like this. People who are very in the here and now, very focused on sensations and feelings and the immediate feedback loop with reality are douloi. Douloi are naive, they use naive gnosis, raw immediacy, in which their noesis is always in service to their gnosis. These are the kinds of people who are going to notice if the crop is wilting. They're not going to wander through it thinking about, you know, composing Beethoven's Seventh Symphony and not noticing that the stalks are all drooping. The this here now makes a big impact on the dualic mind. The sensation, the seeing of it strikes them with a force that is uniquely strong. And it means, yeah, okay, they can notice when it's time to water the crops. They can remember, hey, it looks like the cat's hungry. The immediate life needs that are around them and which reality is constantly giving them input of evidence for, they will attend to that input because that raw flow of experience matters to them more than it matters to the other character types. Banausoi are naive noesis, which is systematic learning and thinking. Oh, and I got a flip-flop on the naive there. I'll fix that. So the idea is that these are people who can learn a trade. They can study under a master and discover how to become a great carpenter and how to build houses that don't fall down. They can learn the rules. They're willing to separate themselves enough from their immediate feelings and reactions to learn something alien to them and try to climb the ladder to systematically master it and become a great craftsman. And because they become a great craftsman, they can build you a house that doesn't fall down. It's anybody who went to school knows the extent to which you have to be able to put your needs on hold to study. You might have liked to party like crazy before, but if you want to be an anesthesiologist, you're going to need some quiet time with your books. And you're going to need to create a life in which you protect that insulation from the pushing and shoving of parties and raw experience and who's squabbling with whom. And the Banausic disciplines require that. And of course, it's a two-edged sword because it also means you're withdrawing from the immediate flow of experience. You're going to miss some things. Didn't we all miss some things when we went to college? Our friends who were out partying had some experiences we didn't get to have. We had to miss those things because if we didn't miss those things, then we wouldn't have learned the thing we needed to learn for tomorrow's test or for the paper we had to write. There is a negation. Michelle, yeah, what do we want to, since you have to leave soon, let's bring you off mute. Go ahead. You got to find your mute button though.
Wait, so first of all, I really have to say, Rick, you have done an outstanding job of not only containing the universe, but containing all of it. It seems like your appetite for books just never ends, and I suggest reading more Clarice Lispector. She might be more to your taste than the heavy Arant. Arant is very heavy, and Simone really probably won't like her. She's very thin. But I suggest reading Clarice Lispector and perhaps working on your writing because I definitely see the signals of a great American writer. And even if you don't want to be a public figure, you can still publish on Amazon. It takes like less than 72 hours. So I will say that. Two, I think you need to create dialogue. I think that's like something that may have been missing. Maybe you're looking for a way to get a job by talking, but it seems like you have many ways of talking. It sounds like you have 12,000 ways of talking. So it's like the 12,000 headed dragon. I mean, obviously that's something to see and a sight to behold. But I think if you can contact me and write me a message if you want to get some editing done, because I already edited a book called Whoreson. That's going to be a great American classic. I'm working on my think about my next author, and if you have any ideas of being an author, I would gladly help you.
Thank you, Michelle. Before you leave, can you type into the chat the name of that writer you were recommending? Because I always capture the text.
Well, here, why don't I copy and paste some of what he's written
That'd be
to
great.
get the idea that he's classic Americana, because he hasn't published his book yet. So I'm not going to release it, but he has some other stuff that he sent me. I'm going to look through it and see what I can copy and paste for you. But he absolutely is better than Faulkner.
Thank you,
He
Michelle.
talks about, in the beginning, he talks about how his mother found a sergeant, and she was like a teen prostitute, and she fell in love with the sergeant because he was a sergeant, and he was so cool, and he wore leather pants. And then she talks about how she was separated from his mother because she found him LSD at age 4. I mean, it's a hell of a story. It's really, really fun, very experimental, and very wise.
Thank you, Michelle.
But I will get off the audio and look for that copy paste. But if you want, you can also just include your email. But
Thank you. Yeah, my email for anyone who wants is toad@eskimo.com. I'll put it in the chat there. You can always reach me there. It'll take me a while to respond. I don't read email every day, but sooner or later I'll get to it. And I'll call on Josh, John, and Stephen in just a second. I'm just at the point of wrapping up the 3 types so that we have a kind of shared basis. So you can see how the doulos is basically their loyalty is to the raw flow of experience, the immediacy. It's not that they don't have noesis. It's that they make the noesis serve the gnosis. When they think systematically, when they learn things, it is in service of their feelings and their experiences and their sensations. Conversely, it's not that the Benausos doesn't have gnosis. We all have both faculties, but that the Benausos has committed himself to the life of the intellectual, to the intellectual life. And that means committed himself to noesis. His gnosis, he still has it, but he only uses it in service to his noesis. And you see this with intellectuals who cherry pick the facts, right? It's not that they have never had an experience in their lives that they paid attention to. It's that they pay attention to the ones that satisfy their theories, that prove their theories as far as they're concerned. And those experiences they collect and they hoard them and they gather them. And if you question their ideologies, they dole out these little proofs, these little evidences and facts. But what they're not showing is all of the other evidences and experiences that they suppressed because they don't satisfy the ideology. So what you get is a situation in which a doulos is a prisoner of his feelings and experiences, whereas the Benausos is a prisoner of his training and intellect and ideas. He's an ideologue. Who doesn't think he's an ideologue? Each of them thinks they're seeing the truth. And what this is more than any other defining characteristic, the thing that defines an Aristos is that it is a person who refuses to be ruled by either of these faculties. It's a person who says, if I absolutely commit myself to gnosis, I'm going to end up parochial and limited. I mean, yes, I'll have a great life of immersion. I might have some fantastic sex, but the problem is there are all these other goals I have, and I won't be able to pursue them if I'm not willing to create some space to learn things and study things. But likewise, they don't want to be a servant of noesis either. They're like, I don't want to live a desiccated life in which I know all these things and I've learned how to do all these things, but it's hard for me to remember why anything matters because I've cut myself off from the juices of life. The raw flow of experience has so much to offer. And I also don't want to wander off down into the land of theory and be disconnected from the truth. Right? Gnosis is the tether for noesis that reconnects it to the sensations and feelings that are actually happening and can fix it. So the Aristos is the person who says, in order not to be a prisoner of either of these things, I'm going to put my identity in a third new place. And in that third new place, I am not my gnosis the way a doulos is their gnosis. And I'm not my noesis in the way that a banausos is their noesis. I am a third person. And as my counselors, I have gnosis and noesis. And I'm grateful for them, but I also only half trust them. And I use them to criticize each other in my search for the truth. The Aristos is the one who understands the major problems of human epistemology, who understands the addictive quality that these two faculties have, and who refuses to behave like an addict, who says, I'm the reason that an Aristos is fit to govern and the others are not, according to the Greeks, is that if you put a banausos in charge, you either get some profit monger who's in there to rip everybody off and fill his pockets, or you get some ideologue who's there to prove his theories right, even if it makes everybody miserable. But he believes his theories, he trusts his theories, he has to inflict his theories on the world. And then when the evidence mounts that his theories aren't actually a good fit for governance, he's going to try to look away from all that evidence and only look at the few successes and say, that proves that I was right. He can't distance himself from his ideologies. In the same way that the doulos makes for terrible governance because he's so moody. He's moody as hell. And so, today, he might love you, tomorrow he might hate you. What he's going to stand for is going to change from day to day so radically that there's no consistency from one day to the next. You can't build a civilization off of that. Also, he's too parochial. He's not going to trust the other experts as much. He never learned to trust expertise. He's still too attached to immediate experience and feelings. He's going to try to act in ways that please himself. Only the Aristos recognizes that pleasing himself is not the purpose of government. And only the Aristos recognizes that getting rich or exercising or proving a theory are also not the purpose of government. And as a result, what the Greek take is in Aristotle and elsewhere, it's not that Aristoi, and Donald alludes to this, it's not that Aristoi make the perfect governors. It's that douloi and banausoi are so obviously unfit. With an Aristos, you have at least the possibility, because you've got somebody who's skeptical about themselves, who's skeptical about their feelings and appetites, who's skeptical about their greed, who's skeptical about what they've learned and their theories and their ideas, and therefore is willing to search beyond themselves for the truth. And that is the best possible chance to locate the right things to do when you're trying to govern, is to open yourself to this broader experience. Listen, it's this. Sharon's got her thumbs up because right in a medical community, the medical professionals know that each of them has their own area of expertise and they need the other experts. They have to bring in that understanding from the other experts to get the whole picture. They know it. They learn it in medical school. There are the occasional people who don't seem to have learned it in med school, but most medical professionals get that it takes a whole network of experts, right, to make this go. And the Aristos is the type of character who has gotten to the point of getting beyond themselves and their theories and their feelings and understands that it takes a bigger world to govern effectively. So this is where these castes come from. And this is a gross oversimplification. And you can see how these roughly correspond to the economic roles and why they would end up with these as the things that correspond. So now I'm going to turn back to the question. Sorry to keep you guys waiting so long. I hope you held on to what you had in mind. Josh, you want to tell us what's on your mind? You had your hand up. I don't know if you noticed you had your hand up here. Oh, maybe not. Maybe you stepped away. All right. John, would you come off mute and tell us what's on your mind?
Hey, Rick. Hmm. Couple things. We'll start with the first one. Are you saying that the best way to run a society is to have a place where everybody can kind of be themselves? Like that there's like the maximum number of like, say, boxes people can fit into? And please don't say like, oh no, I don't mean, boxes are constricting people. I don't mean it that way. I mean like boxes, frameworks through which people can then refine what they, how they want to be. So like, like a crude box, you go this route, you go that route, and then you refine it within that box kind of thing. So like more boxes versus less boxes.
Yeah, certainly this is Hannah Arendt's position. And in this, she's emulating the Roman and Greek thinkers. That the idea is that everybody needs their oikos, their household, in which they can be themselves. Because if you have nowhere where you're allowed to be yourself, how can you engage in a conversation with someone else about the differences between you? You've never been given the opportunity to find out who you are. So everybody does need that. That's certainly their take, which is what I'm kind of summarizing today.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about the household. I know that's like kind of the realm of the where people are individuals, but I'm thinking more like in in the
In governance.
let's say the Banausic world or like the marketplace or whatever society at large.
Yeah, especially in government. The idea is that the truth, and this is an ancient idea that doesn't fit very well in the modern world, but the ancient idea is that the truth is far more complex than any individual human mind can grasp. Nobody's ever going to be smart enough to see the whole picture. And you really need a group of people with different perspectives and different expertise to each be able to bring those together to govern effectively. And so essentially what that means is society, not just for the health of the individual, but for the health of the society as a whole, requires the ability, it requires being structured in such a way that people can bring their unique perspectives to the role of governance. And that's kind of like what you're talking about.
Okay, and then another question I had was it doesn't this idea that the Greeks they were trying to justify their systems and they looked to like you know to invent this Aristoi Banausoi duoi. Wouldn't that kind of work against their idea of justifying? Because then they have to start justifying why people aren't certain
Yes.
roles that maybe they shouldn't be. It sounds like that would lead to like a
Yes.
uprising against the system.
Yes. It is some of the most entertaining stuff in Aristotle when he talks about this. And he basically says, we know this is how it's supposed to work, but it doesn't always work that way. And that's a huge, huge problem. He says, not only is it an act of injustice to enslave an Aristos, you got somebody, or to take a Banausos and force them to work in the household when actually they could be a fantastic sculptor. And that's always been their dream. And you're like, no, you need to dig ditches. He says it's gross on an individual level because you're not letting these people be true to what's really in their character. They want to express their expertise. We do. We feel that itch. He says that's bad enough. He says, but worse is you might have needed that sculptor. Society might not make it through the next crisis without that person speaking at a government level with those perspectives that are unique to him. And instead, you've got him digging ditches. He says, both for the individual fulfillment and for the society as a whole, the societies have a duty to correct themselves, acknowledge when they have blundered, and promote the people who should be doing higher levels of work. and to demote people. And this is the most controversial thing he said from a Greek perspective, to demote people who are in charge but have no business being there. He says it's just dangerous to everybody if you put an appetitive, greedy person in charge of your country.
Good luck trying to do that. And then last question, was the Ken you referred to earlier Kenneth Smith? Was he here in the meeting with us?
No, it was Ken
Oh,
Huey.
a different Ken. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Ken
All right,
Huey
thank
knows
you.
Kenneth Smith. They've known each other for a long time. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
was excited.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to work on to go through these works of Kenneth Smith, and he's like somebody who you could like call up on the phone and talk to, you know,
Yeah.
but he's
Yes.
got these profound ideas and all that stuff, so it's kind of cool. All right, thank you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it really is a treat. We're really lucky that this guy's writing this amazing stuff, and he's alive, and he's still here, and he's still writing stuff. So I don't call him as often as I should. I get caught up in these seminars, but I really should call him because this is a rare opportunity. It's like being alive when Hannah Arendt was writing. I mean, it's really exciting. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
It's this big tendency, in my explorations, this question of the genocide. In my time, I noticed that in Marxism, there was that genocidal tendency. And the ambition is to make the world pure. We must have a clean slate to start again. Let's exterminate all the kulaks, let's wipe them, clean the slates, and then we'll create the pure society in which the grand Marxist flower will arise. But they usually end up creating a wreck. And you see that echoed in the Nazis. When we've cleansed society of all the Jews, then the perfect society will arise. Actually, oddly enough, Mussolini actually went backwards on that a bit. He had plans of wiping out many elements in Italian society. He wanted to wipe out the church. He wanted to wipe out the capitalists. He had, and then he thought, when he saw what was going on in Russia, he thought, well, no, maybe I'll try and make a deal with all these different groups as long as they respect the national ideal. They have their place. So it's a little bit of a backpedal, but we see this quality appearing that the fascists really, it's claimed, and this upsets a lot of people, but the fascists were ideal, arose out of Marxism. That's where its origins lie. Now, I was looking at Carroll Quigley. Now, he seems to have taken up some of the ideas that you've expressed through Hannah Arendt. Interestingly, he claimed the fascists and the Nazis were not nationalists. They represented the overthrow of the national ideal. They were claiming to be nationalists when they weren't. They were destroying the nation. They were exhibiting that quality, spiritual genocide we see in Marxism. But of course, Marx didn't originate, or the Marxists didn't originate the spiritual genocide. The church had been doing it in the Middle Ages. They were simply carrying on the tradition, the genocide of the spirits. These modern clerics like Karl Marx, who couldn't find himself a clerical job, were carrying on the clerical tradition of the Middle Ages, the clean slate. Let's wipe the slate clean and start again. Let's destroy all the progress since we even found a cave, and then we'll create the pure world. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. when we get to the, a year or two from now, when we get to the modern section of Millennium Microcosm, we'll do a deep dive on Arendt's critique of Marx. It's really interesting. And one of the things is that she sees an enormous split between Marx and most Marxists. So many of the things that you attribute to Marx are properly attributable to Marxists, but frequently not to Marx. She says Marx's blunders tended to be more traditional, the same kinds of mistakes Adam Smith and others made, rather than being the novelties that Stalin and the other Marxists built off of. It's really interesting. I mean, basically, her critique's different from anything I've seen before. Thank you for turning me on to Carroll Quigley. I'll go check out his work. It sounds very interesting. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I just wanted to take us at a slightly different angle because I think we sit here Monday after Monday and we discuss very, very interesting topics. I mean, having just finished with Duloi, Banisoi, and Aristoi, the New Age philosophers, I think, are starting to program AI. And I came across this article in the New York Times where it said one of humanity's oldest disciplines and one of the newest inventions are distinctly made for each other. And I thought that was very interesting because while we discuss character types, how is that going to impact the programming? Because every single philosopher has a different way of looking at things. And if this AI is going to be all inclusive and it's going to govern our lives, where are we going to go with this? It goes on to say, AI presents a fresh way for philosophers to ask ancient questions, and that is what we're doing, and its own set of new ones that they're uniquely trained to engage with. And it goes on to define what are these questions. But I just found that a very, very, very interesting concept. And where do we fit all these ideas that we keep engaging with in our modern way of life?
Sharon, I've said it before, and I doubtless will say it again. I'm certainly saying it today. You have an astonishing and unerring ability to strike right to the core of the topics, including where I'm going to go next. Because I have all these notes prepared about the relationship between these three character types and AI. I didn't know we were going to get so many new people today, so I had to set it aside for now. But next week, we will be talking about.
Rick, this article, as brief as it was in the New York Times, and it's written by Benjamin Wallace. It says, hire deep thinkers for AI research. It's a no-brainer.
Yes. Yes.
And I just found it fascinating.
Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
What happens if you develop a large language model AI by feeding it all of the works of Hannah Arendt, not just her published works, but the Library of Congress has boxes and boxes and boxes of her unpublished notes where she thought through the stuff before she wrote her books. If you put all that stuff into a large language model, what do you get? Well, wouldn't we like to find out?
Yes. Correct.
So, we'll talk about that next week. We'll talk about AI.
Yeah, I thought it was a little different angle than what we've been discussing, but it seemed relevant to me. And it's very interesting and fascinating. Not interesting, fascinating.
Yes. And also on the docket for next week, about a month ago, Stephen asked a question that I hadn't answered yet. You see, I pay attention to Stephen. I've been thinking about it this whole time and doing some research. He asked a question: if modern society did indeed succeed in stamping out the Aristoi, would Banausoi and Duloi naturally develop into Aristoi to replace the missing function in human society? He speculated about whether that would happen. And so I did a bunch of digging in Aristotle and Hannah Arendt, and I have their answer to your question. But again, we'll have to talk about that next week, depending on how long things take. So this is juicy stuff. Welcome to all of you who've never been here before. It's wonderful to have you along. And anytime you want, feel free to put up your hand and ask. You can see how this works now. I'll as soon as we get to a stopping point, I always pause and go to the questions because it's to be a dialogue. So I hope you had a good time. I love it.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Thank you.
Okay, see you next week.
Talk to you all next week.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.